Good morning. It is now 8:30 a.m. and this meeting will begin. Welcome to the Blue-Green Algae Task Force meeting. We're excited to have more than 300 people on this web-based meeting. My name is John Moore and I'm with the Department of Environmental Protection. This meeting is being broadcast over the Zoom link on which you registered, as well as the Florida channel. I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items before I turn it over to Dr. Thomas Frazier. Today's web-based meeting affords the public with multiple vehicles for providing comments. Oral comments will be welcome during the public comment period, and we'll have more instructions on that to come in just a moment. Additionally, the department is accepting written comments, which will be compiled and distributed to task force members. Those comments are due within 2 weeks of today's meeting or December 3rd. You may email your comments to bluegreenalgaetaskforce@floridadep.gov. And this email address is also on our website at floridadep.gov/blue-green algae task force. During the public comment period, oral comments will be accepted. To ensure everyone has a chance to comment, comments will be limited to 3 minutes and a timer will appear on the screen to try and hold us to that. If you're participating via Zoom on a computer, to speak, use the raise hand feature. If you've called in via phone, pressing *9 on your phone will raise your hand, and *6 will mute and unmute your line when it's your opportunity to speak. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Thomas Frazier, Chief Science Officer with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection.
Okay, thanks, John. So I think what we'll do first is make sure that we have all of our task force members on the line here. So we'll go through a little roll call. And so when I say your name, just unclick mute and give me a present and we'll be good to go. So first, Dr. Geiser.
Present.
Thank you. Dr. Parsons.
Here.
Thank you. Dr. Sullivan.
Present.
Thank you. Dr. Graham.
Present.
And finally, Dr. Paul.
Present.
Okay, so we've got everybody here on the line, and it's been a bit since we've met, so maybe I can go back quickly and introduce the task force members, provide a little background, and I'll just probably go in the order that we started. So with regard to Dr. Geiser is George M. Barley Endowed Chair of Everglades Research and a professor of biological sciences at Florida International University. Dr. Parsons is a professor of marine science at Florida Gulf Coast University and director of the Coastal Watershed Institute and Vesper Field Station. Dr. Jim Sullivan is the executive director of FAU's Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institution. Dr. Graham is the Carl S. Swisher Eminent Scholar in Water Resources in the Department of Agricultural and Biological Engineering at the University of Florida, and also the director of the UF Water Institute. Dr. Paul is director of the Smithsonian Marine Station in Fort Pierce. So glad to see everybody again, and I think we will just now roll into our agenda. So it's a relatively focused agenda today. We will cover some old business. We would like to give you an update on our Protecting Florida Together.gov website, and we'll also provide an update with some of the educational signage that we discussed in our last meeting. And the bulk of the meeting will be devoted to a presentation and a discussion of material provided and presented by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And then we'll have a brief public comment period and some general task force discussion, and then we'll have some closing remarks. So I think with that said, we will go ahead and jump right into some of the old business. And I will turn it over to Christine Morris from the Office of Environmental Accountability and Transparency to give us a little update on our website.
Good morning, members of the task force. My name is Christine Morris, and I am going to give you all a bird's eye view of the some of the enhancements nearing completion on the next phase of the Protecting Florida Together.gov website. Before I walk you through a few of the functions of the Water Quality Dashboard and its Preference Center, I wanted to give an overview of the website changes in 3 main areas. First, we're expanding the map statewide and updating how we display data on it. It will still include blue-green algae and red tide data together, but we're also updating how users can view nutrient information and more. Second, we're adding a preference center to allow people to sign up for alerts based on their personal preferences, so they can receive information about blue-green algae, red tide, and other updates at the frequency of their choosing. Finally, we're re-envisioning the Resource Center and turning it into an education center to provide our citizens and visitors with information on blue-green algae, red tide, sources of nutrients, among other topics. It will include photos, videos, infographics, and more. To illustrate, I'll show you some of the updates. As you can see, the map will be statewide and is divided by watersheds as a means by which users can navigate. When you arrive at the map, markers will be displayed for the blue-green algae observed samples, including those that are identified as toxic, and for red tide samples above background. When a marker is selected, you'll see any applicable health notification and effects reported. One significant change we've made with the statewide map is to allow users to view where samples were taken, but blue-green algae was not observed, and for red tide samples taken with results above background. In addition to blue-green algae and red tide information, users will be able to explore water quality data and get a better understanding of whether a water body is attaining standards in 3 areas: total nitrogen, total phosphorus, and chlorophyll A. In addition, we are working on adding nutrient impairments that are more applicable to springs. When a user selects a watershed area, they will then reveal subwatersheds. These are color-coded to identify whether the water body represented is attaining its standards for those 3 parameters. Upon selecting a subwatershed, details relating to that assessment appear, including an annual geometric means and the individual sample results for those assessment stations. These graphs are available for TN, TP, and chlorophyll A. A feature we're really excited about includes the launch of a preference center. A preference center allows individuals to sign up for alerts based on their own preferences. You can sign up for alerts for red tide, blue-green algae, and/or Protecting Florida Together news and updates. If interested in blue-green algae or red tide data, you can select the areas that are important to you. Within an area, you can choose the frequency for the type of updates you want. For blue-green algae, for example, update options include all samples, samples taken where blue-green algae was observed, or only toxic algae samples. Similar types of options are available for red tide updates in coastal areas. You can update these preferences at any time, seeking to get emails more or less frequently, or add to or remove areas. Thank you for allowing me an opportunity to show you some of the updates we're working on for protectingfloridatogether.gov website. And Dr. Fraser, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you, Christine, for sharing that information. Pretty excited about that. A lot of hard work went into improving the website, and we will continue to make improvements every day to get the best information that we possibly can to all of our stakeholders. So I think last time we also talked about a fair amount of discussion about signage, and one of the things that we did is took that information back and compiled it. And so we got a new sign, actually. So I think we can go straight there. And I just want to, for the benefit of the group, remind people that we spent a lot of time on the educational signage, and these are signs that are intended for permanent placement at common access points that have a history of blue-green algae blooms or blue-green algae related issues or connections to those types of waters. And so if you look at this most recent sign, we also have a Spanish translation that's coming on that, but what we did here is we changed it or modified it in a way that allowed people to get the most recent information. And that's something that we heard loud and clear, not only from the task force members, but stakeholders and some of the other agency folks that we worked with. And so that's front and center. It allows us to direct people directly to that Protecting Florida Together website that Christine just went over. We added more descriptors up here in the upper part of the signage, right? And we also added information on the bottom that says what to do if you actually see a bloom. So we've simplified it, but we've made the messaging, I think, a little more direct and a little more accessible to folks. So we're working right now with a number of agency partners to deploy this signage again, and those will be at public access points. And so that's where we are there. And I think, we also had some discussion about what the advisory signage might look like moving forward. And we continue to work with the Department of Health on that front. And hopefully we'll be able to come back in a subsequent meeting and go over that signage. So I think we'll move on from there if we can. And I will like to get into the bulk of this presentation today. And that is a presentation from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and to, I guess what we'll do is we'll let Colonel Kelly, who's commander of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Jacksonville District, introduce his team and provide a brief introduction to the presentation today. So Colonel Kelly, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
And hopefully I'm also got the video working. I am Colonel Andrew Kelly. I'm the commander for the Jacksonville District U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I've got a few people on the line with me that will also brief. So I will let them introduce themselves. But I am, again, the commander of the Jacksonville District. This is a focus on the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual, and more specifically, the HAB component that we're looking to get into our decision-making criteria for the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual to be complete in 2022. So with me, I've got a couple folks. I'll open it up for Gina to introduce herself.
Hi, good morning. This is Gina Ralph. I'm the lead scientist here at the Jacksonville District, and I'm looking forward to our discussion today with regard to our algal bloom risk metric.
Oh, sorry. I'm not sure if you all heard me. Anyway, this is Gina Ralph, lead scientist with the Jacksonville District. Very excited to participate in our discussion today with regard to our algal bloom risk metric. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tim Geisen. I'm the senior project manager here at the Corps and the project manager for the LOSOM effort.
Hi, this is Jim Riley. I'm the lead environmental engineer for the environmental branch, and I'm working the Lake Okeechobee System Operation Manual job.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Very, very happy to be here today and to introduce this, and we'll get into quite a few specifics, but we'll start with a basic outline of what the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual is, what it's going to do, and then specifically, what we need from this group in terms of helping us get to our next step for this pretty important effort. Next slide, please. And that's me. I've introduced myself. Okay. So, what are we doing and why? So the overarching reason why we're here today is we are completing a system operating manual for Lake Okeechobee, and that's to change the operations that we've been going with the schedule of the lake since the last schedule was updated in 2008. And why we're doing it now, we are completing the rehabilitation of Lake Okeechobee, the Herbert Hoover Dike, So our construction will be complete in 2022. And what we're really trying to get after is as soon as we complete the repairs to the dike and change the risk of the dike, we can immediately, as soon as we're done, have a brand new operation manual that's updated not only for the safety of the dike, but for things that have changed in the state of Florida and around the system in the last decade plus. We know and absolutely understand that life has changed and the world has changed and the environment's changed. And so we need a better operations plan for the lake and using the lake and using the water. And that's what the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual will do for us. Next slide. So this is about what the goals and objectives are for this effort. The pictures represent the authorized project purposes. So this is what the lake and the Herbert Hoover Dike and the system was authorized for. So you've got all of those components that we absolutely have to keep a balance in. In the box below, it identifies the specific objectives that we undertook for this study. Next slide, please. And then more specifically, and we'll get to a lot of the specifics as we go forward. But what we're talking about today is most aligned with the objectives that are in red. So we see this effort specifically fitting into the managing of risk to public health and safety, life and property, as well as enhancing the ecology of Lake Okeechobee and the estuaries as we look at the system holistically. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is our timeline. What I'd like to start with is, we're going to complete this effort in 2022. It is vitally important that as soon as we're done with the repairs to Herbert Hoover Dike, that we are able to immediately initiate a new operations plan. And so knowing that that's in 2022, we started this a little bit early, probably a little earlier than we would normally do. Typically, these types of things take a couple to 3 years, but we started a year plus ago setting up this new schedule. And so what that really means is we've had the appropriate amount of time and appropriate amount of public engagement to really hone in on our scoping efforts. So as you can see on the top part of that circle, we've done much more than 10 public meetings, and we worked our way through thousands of comments from stakeholders and the public across the board, as well as the agencies. We executed a bunch of educational webinars that help people get into the understanding mode, and we took care of that, all in the February, March, April, and consistently since then to bring people up to speed on exactly what we're trying to do here. And then in the first light blue box with the PDT meetings and public workshops, we're averaging about 3 meetings a month. And so we have our large PDT meetings, project delivery team meetings, where we typically get about 200 or 200 plus participants in that from all across the board, including the public. And then we've got 6 sub-team elements that also do meetings, and we're getting 75 to 100 participants in each one of those sub-teams to really dig down deep into each of those authorized purposes and the specific concerns that people have with how we balance this operation schedule. And then I'll highlight at the bottom in the darker color, developing the alternatives, evaluating, compare, and then selecting, right? So we are now at the point where we're developing alternatives. We just completed or are in the middle of completing a Pareto analysis where we took a look at over 120,000 options that are basically theoretical schedules for the lake. And we're necking those things down into the ones that are absolutely, completely undoable, to the point that it's about 3,000 of those. Those are in the ludicrous category. Couldn't possibly do them. And then you've got others that kind of are way out of balance, totally focused on only one authorized purpose and kind of forgetting about others. And so what we're looking at is somewhere around 25 to 30,000 options right now that at least cover the bases in terms of our authorized purposes and objectives. And so we're going to work that way through. Going to do a couple of iterations of the modeling and stakeholder engagement, and we're going to work that down to a series of realistic options. Then we're going to walk through those, and we are going to make a final best decision in July. So the Corps of Engineers is committed to coming out with the best schedule in July. And then we've got to do all of the documentation and make sure that's correct and continue all the stakeholder engagement and do all of that stuff to get a final decision and approval. But again, the reason why we're here and the reason why we've got some timelines that we're going to talk about in the future in this presentation is we have got to get to a decision in July. Next slide, please. And so now I will turn over to Mr. Tim Geisen. He's the project manager. He's the one that runs all this, and he's going to walk through specifically kind of how the LOSOM effort is a part of the overall system, and a little bit more specifically on what we're trying to get after. Tim?
Thank you, sir, and good morning, everyone. I want to start off with kind of a big picture. There you go, thank you. Big picture of the importance of Lake Okeechobee. As everybody probably has heard, Lake Okeechobee is the heart of the Everglades, but it's also the heart of the entire Central and South Florida water resource system. So it's not only important to the environment, but the man-made system as well. The lake is a big part of the Central and Southern Florida project, which provides flood control and water supply to over 9 million people in South Florida. C&SF is an interconnected system of thousands of miles of canals, 720 miles of levees, and several hundred water control structures. The Corps of Engineers operates and maintains Lake Okeechobee and the outlet structures to the lake, as well as other parts of the C&SF project in conjunction with our partners at the South Florida Water Management District. Lake Okeechobee is operated and governed by a manual that kind of helps us figure out how to best operate the lake. And that manual is developed in a public process, which is what we're engaged in with the LOSOM effort. Next slide, please. So a little bit more on what the operating manual is. The operating manual is described to the water managers here at the Corps how to operate different project components. And we have operating manuals for all parts of the C&SF systems you can see on the map. The C&SF operating manual consists of 7 different volumes covering all of these parts of the state. LOSOM is volume 3 in conjunction with the Everglades agricultural area, and that's what we're updating currently. To make things a little confusing, the operating manual itself contains a lot of other information other than just the operating criteria and the lake schedule. All of that other information is being updated in a parallel process with what we're doing on LOSOM, and eventually that will all come together when we have our new lake schedule and operating criteria developed into that comprehensive Volume 3 manual. Hopefully that did not confuse everyone. Next slide, please. This slide shows kind of a flow chart of our formulation strategy, which will get us to a recommended lake schedule in July of next year, as Colonel Kelly mentioned. Currently, we're in that second blue box with the conceptual plan evaluation, which was the modeling effort is complete. We're now engaged in the evaluation of that data. Part of that evaluation was a Pareto analysis of the data to help get us down to a more manageable number of plans to look at. The purpose of the conceptual plan evaluation is to take a look at all of these potential options that are focused on different objectives for lake management. As Colonel Kelly mentioned, we have 4 overarching project objectives, and some of those have multiple different parts, which lead us to about 9 total sub-objectives when you talk about environmental benefits to different parts of the system and so on. We'll come out of the conceptual plan evaluation, and I invite everyone to join us at our PDT meeting tomorrow, where we'll get into a lot of the details on the conceptual plan evaluation and how we'll utilize the PDT and stakeholder input to get us down to that iteration 1 initial array of alternatives of about 9 or so schedules. That'll be a great discussion tomorrow. But iteration 1 will give us a set of schedules that will lean towards some of our objectives and allow us to really engage in conversations with all of our stakeholders on what's really important in management of the lake, and eventually lead us to our balanced array of alternatives that we'll look at in iteration 2 sometime late next spring. And that's where we'll select a new schedule from. Right now, the focus is more on the conversation and really determining what's important for water management in the state of Florida moving forward. As Colonel Kelly mentioned, we'll have by end of July of next year, a recommended schedule, which will lead us into our NEPA process, which I'll talk about a little bit later as we talk about overall schedule. But this gives you a feel for our plan evaluation and selection process and the amount of work we have moving forward ahead of us. Next slide, please. All right. So as we engage in this evaluation process, we use several different modeling tools to aid us in that decision-making effort and to provide the data that we're looking at. As I mentioned, we just had the modeling team finish the conceptual plan modeling, which Colonel Kelly mentioned was 120,000 different model runs. That was done using the original simulation model basins, which from the graphic on the right is that kind of greenish area and the light pinkish area below that. So that model covers that part of the system. And that's just one of the 2 regional models which we'll be using moving forward. The other one covers the more southern part of the system, and that's the RSM GL or Glades Lexa version of the model. And those are our large-scale hydrologic models which simulate water movement throughout the system using the C&SF structures in canals as well as natural parts of the system, and give us all the data that we look at. Those regional models include climate input, such as rainfall and evapotranspiration, all the physical characteristics of the system. And what we get out of all of that is a daily time series of data of water levels and flows, and allows us to look at demands not met, both for ecological and municipal water supply and agricultural water supply. And all of that model data is then used in the evaluation process, which I talked about on the previous slide. We also utilize some sub-regional and detailed type models. One specifically is the DMSTA model, which is a water quality model, which will allow us to look at the water quality of water coming out of Lake Okeechobee into the Everglades system. And then we also use different screening tools and techniques to help us evaluate all that data that we get from our larger models. And one of those being the Pareto evaluation, which was mentioned, and we'll talk a lot more detail about that tomorrow. But as you can imagine, with all the data that we're looking at, utilizing spreadsheets and things like that becomes very useful. And the way we use this data, we have performance metrics, which are developed or have been developed for this effort, and that data supports those metrics, which give us more detailed information about how different plans are affecting different parts of the system. And those metrics fall into two different categories. First category are metrics that allow us to measure the success of achieving our project objectives. And the second set are metrics that allow us to look at overall effects to different parts of the system, which may not necessarily be directly tied to one of the project's objectives. Next slide, please. So that leads us into the focus of what we're here today to talk about is the algal bloom risk metric. And that's just one of 50 plus metrics that we've developed for LOSOM. And all of those metrics go into the evaluations, as I'd mentioned, for all parts of our evaluation process, from conceptual plan evaluation through the detailed evaluation of a balanced set of schedules in iteration 2. And all of that information feeds into our National Environmental Policy Act document, in this case an EIS, or Environmental Impact Statement, which will cover effects of our selected plan over the entire system. Next slide, please. All right, and this slide gives you an overall feel for the schedule for LOSOM. As Colonel Kelly mentioned, we started this effort at the beginning of 2019, some internal planning starting at the end of 2018 before we kicked off with our scoping meetings in February of March of last year. So this is not a fast process, but by necessity it needs to move along slowly so we can have valuable conversations with all of our stakeholders through all parts of this process. So currently we're in that alternative evaluation arrow there with our conceptual plan evaluation, and that covers the entire evaluation process, which I talked about on the previous slide, through plan selection. Starting then in August of next year, we'll get into our documentation and decision phase of the effort, where we'll compile everything into our EIS document and our and operating criteria. And all of that will be available for evaluation and review by the stakeholders, and we'll accept feedback and at that point, ultimately culminating with a final decision and a new schedule in October of 2022. Not with that, I will turn it back over to Colonel Kelly.
Great, Tim. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Having a little trouble with the camera, but here's what we're asking for. Next slide, please. So before we get to Mr. Jim Riley, who's going to be getting into a lot of the specifics. And talking more importantly about what this is not, as well as what it is in terms of how we're going to use it going forward. Really, what we're asking for is a simple thing. Does this approach make sense? As I mentioned, we have got to get to a system where an operating manual that accurately or to the best of our ability incorporates harmful algal blooms into our decision making, and more specifically into how we develop the schedule. So really, does what we're asking for make sense? The top two, in my mind, and we kind of debate this a little bit, but the top two bullet points: is it sound, and are there any underlying comments on theory, the concepts, computational aspects? That part, I think, is very critical to kind of getting this into the modeling so that we can make a decision, the best decision we can make about the schedule come July. And then the bottom two, I think, lead us to a place where we know this isn't a silver bullet. We know this has limitations. We know that the science will get better. We will have a better understanding and we'll be able to improve. And so the bottom two, in my mind, lead us to the ability as we move forward to be able to incorporate even better use of understanding of the algae in general so that we can make better decisions not only or more specifically on a current operation. So here's what we're asking for. Again, we've got to get something into the decision cycle as quickly as possible. Next slide. And so back to kind of where we are. This is about the third or fourth time we've seen a version of a schedule, right? So as we go into iteration 1 and iteration 2, where we take the thousands of options that we have available and start necking them down into the best possible model going forward, we're looking for kind of a go, no go by the 10th of December. And that will allow us to put the information, the best information that we have into our schedule and account for our harmful algal blooms as we go to make decisions and make the best decision we can about the schedule going forward. I'd also like to take just a brief second. Next slide, please. So these are the documents we've provided. I think the other ones, except for this PowerPoint presentation, went out at the beginning of November, and then this one, the PowerPoint, got added in, I think, as of yesterday or maybe the day before. But that's what we have out there. I'd also like to take just a quick second. I kind of forgot to mention, so really appreciate this group's effort, and I just wanted to let you know that those things that came out in the consensus documents, I think around October 2019, have really made a difference, right? And in terms of one of those components, the science-based decision-making, data model needs, and monitoring, all of that effort we are using on an almost daily basis as we make decisions specifically on current operations on Lake Okeechobee. So it is 100% useful. It is 100% being utilized right now, and that the amount of information and the amount of attention and effort that we are looking at algae, even in current time, has been extraordinarily beneficial to us in our ability to make decisions about lake releases and other things. So I just really appreciate what we get out of this body, and I think this will be awesome going forward in our ability to make decisions. And then looking far beyond in the future as we follow the science, we anticipate getting better and better and better to be able to get after how we actually operate the lake, and not just what we're doing today, which is trying to get something into the modeling so we can make the best operational schedule, and then we will continue to follow the science to be able to utilize that schedule going into the future to make even more current operational decisions in the future. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Jim Riley to talk even more.
All right, is my mic working? I think that's a yes, I'm assuming. Yeah, I'm Jim Riley. I'm the core lead for the LOSOM Water Quality Subteam. It's a multi-agency team. We have participation from state, federal agencies, university groups, and as well as public participation. Next slide, please. A little background on why we're taking this path. There's been 10 public meetings have been held so far. and there's a great deal of public interest in algae. And the public, you know, the message that I've got, and I think the Corps has gotten, is they want the Corps to consider algal bloom risk in the development of the new operational plan for Lake Okeechobee releases. And you can see all the different areas had different concerns and different focuses, and you can review the slide at your leisure. Next slide, please. A little background. This is a slide I believe it was presented to in the 2020 report to Congress on the issues going on with Lake Okeechobee. Some of the factors, you know, presentation to Congress, the factors with the water quality that drive blooms and whatnot. A little background. So we've had bad freshwater project area blooms. It was 2005, 2006. We had another really bad one in 2016. Both of those were preceded by high winds over Lake Okeechobee, and that stirred up the legacy loading. So the Water Management District, you know, Dr. Zach Welch and others, it's like when you stir up the legacy nutrients into the water column, usually the next year it's a bad year for Lake Okeechobee in terms of bloom production. A little bit more on 2016, as well as the hurricane. There was very high rainfall with large inflows of nutrients to Lake Okeechobee, which resulted in a very high Lake Okeechobee stage. Well, when we get a high stage, we're not happy with how that might potentially impact the levee if we get a couple of tropical storms in a row. So the Corps had to make high, steady freshwater releases during peak algal bloom formation months, which is, you know, the summer months. And when we do that, the high, steady freshwater releases extends the freshwater habitat, where the algal bloom, the freshwater blooms can exist, and it also reduces tidal flushing. By reducing tidal flushing, it causes basically stagnation, and that's apparently what happens. It's a hydraulic thing in the feeder canals to the estuaries. So the algal blooms, the ones that we mostly worry about, the species is Microcystis aeruginosa. I think I pronounced that. I think Dr. Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Let me get. I just flipped through my slides. Let me get back to where I was. Pardon? Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Could you please just click through so all the comment boxes come up? Apologize, we had to build slide. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So if you could click to the slide, perfect. I think it's slide 22. Okay, sorry. I guess I didn't ask for the slide to be clicked. Okay, so that's slide 22. Could you move to slide 23, which is performance metric development? Okay, so as I stated before, we have a water quality sub-team for the LOSOM project. We got scientists and engineers from state, federal, local governments, agencies, tribes, and we have public participation. So, well, we started about a year or so ago, I think, Tim. It seemed like maybe it was longer than that, to look at how we could use the hydrologic model, which is the RSMBN, and the only output from that model is stage and flow. That's the only output. Doesn't do weather, doesn't do satellite imagery. That's the tool we have that we're going to use to develop the alternatives for the new operational schedule. So how could we use that tool to evaluate algal bloom risk to the lake and in the estuaries? So there was two concepts that were developed. One was Dr. Walker. He looked at the data. There was a large database on Lake Okeechobee stage, and chlorophyll A. We had a lot of data, and he developed some predictive equations which would link stage, so we could use the output from the RSMBN. And then we had Dr. Welch from with his crew from the Water Management District, they had the concept to use the Lake Okeechobee environmental band stage envelope as a way to evaluate algal bloom risk. This is a tool to be used as we go through the modeling to kind of guide the modelers is to like stay away from these areas, which is primarily high stages at certain times of the year, so we can help reduce algal bloom risk. So we got our input into the process as they develop the alternatives. That's what we want, right? We want to be able to provide some input so we can address algal bloom risk. So we had time and resource constraints, and the decision was, due to the time and resource constraints, we were going to use the chlorophyll A predictive equations. If we had enough time, the thought was we would develop both with the metric documentation and the review. We didn't have time to do that, so we focused on the chlorophyll A. The primary authors of the metric documentation for the chlorophyll A predictive equations is Dr. Donato Surratt of the Department of Interior, Everglades National Park, and I supported him to some degree. And then, of course, Dr. Bill Walker, who developed the regression analysis equations. Next slide, please. Okay, I think you should be seeing the map with the graphics on the littoral zones and the pelagic zones. So there's 3 zones for the equations. You got the pelagic zone, the littoral west, the littoral south. All of the stations were used to evaluate the conditions within Lake Okeechobee. I got the right slide? Cool. Okay. All right. And the calibration period extends from 99 through 2019. That's what Dr. Bill Walker used. And the model testing period was from 87 through 2018. We'll have an opportunity if you got any questions about how the stations were collected and whatnot. Bill Walker's going to be available later. These stations, these metrics, rather, these zones include the outflow structures, which is when you go to the right of the slide on the graphic, it's S308 that discharges to the coast, the east coast, and it also includes S77, which releases water from Lake Okeechobee to the west coast. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's the equations. You've already been provided to them. It focuses on the summer months, May through August, and when we do the RSMBN runs, I believe there's a 51 period of record, and the model develops a single number using these equations for the chlorophyll A for the summer. So that's what it's doing. So for each year of the period of record, we're getting a single chlorophyll number for each zone. And that's how we're using it right now. Okay, let me go. Next slide, please. Okay, so the output. I think I had already explained the output. The way we would use the equations right now, and this has been discussed, and we need further discussion at the sub-team level to refine it, but we've kind of got it roughed up where there was the thresholds for exceeding, let me think, did I get into I think I missed the slide. Sorry, just a minute, please. I got to get a little back. All right. Okay. I'm sorry. Could you go? Okay, 24. If you could go to 24. I think I jumped ahead. So, yep. Okay. This tool is not intended. This metric is not intended to guide daily or weekly operational decisions. This tool is so we can have input as they develop the new alternatives by running the RSMBN. That's the hydrologic model they're going to be using. Until we have a better tool, this is what we have right now. And we have to have a tool if we want to provide input to the development of the alternatives by like January or February. Otherwise, if we don't have a tool, then we really won't have the option to provide input to the development of the Lake Okeechobee alternatives. So that's what we got right now. In the basic concept of the metric is it uses chlorophyll A as a surrogate for estimating phytoplankton abundance and biomass in the water. And as I said before, Bill Walker, he relied on the very large database of chlorophyll A values and Lake Okeechobee stage data to develop those equations. Two thresholds are that we're using to consider to evaluate the output. You got the 20 part per billion for chlorophyll A. Well, why are we considering that? Well, that's the state concentration standard for chlorophyll A in Lake Okeechobee. Also 40 parts per billion. Well, that was the number that was used in the development of the total maximum daily load target for nutrient loading to Lake Okeechobee. It used 40. And that's a level that's considered a moderate bloom condition, and it's considered an indication of excessive nutrient concentrations. There's no attempt to assess violation of the standards. These metrics, the output of this metric is only used to inform risk of algal bloom development, so we can compare the different alternatives. So as I said before, I want to say it again, each alternative, the RSMBN will produce output for each year out of the 51 period of record. And that's how we can use the chlorophyll A, these type of metrics, this output. So we can compare the alternatives. How do they perform? So if you get one alternative, it's like, well, 51 years out of 51 years, it was 40 parts per billion or above. And then you have another one that was only 20 out of the 51 years, it was 40 parts per billion or above for Lake Okeechobee. Well, the one with 20 is going to be, that's better, lower risk. That's to give you an example of how we'd be using it. Oops, I jumped. Go to the next slide. Okay, next slide, please. And that's the one I already went over because I skipped over one of my slides, one of these slides. That's the water quality stations you ought to be looking at. The monitoring used for the algal bloom metric formulation. 3 zones, pelagic, littoral west, littoral south. I discussed that and went over the calibration period, which is 99 through 2019. And the model testing period that Bill used was 87 through 2018. Bill is if you got any questions on more about this, then I'm going to refer them to Bill. Next slide, please. I think you might have already seen this because I skipped ahead, at least when I was talking through. The summer months of May through August is used to develop a single number for each year of the period of record. Slide 27. 27? No, 26. 26. Oh, did I skip? Okay. Oh, could I go to slide 26, please? Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying right now. You're good.
Okay, I got the equation one on the screen? Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, so the summer months of May through August were used. Bill, if you got questions about why we did it, I think it was the way the regression analysis shows we had the best association for predicting what was happening with chlorophyll A. But Bill Walker's the one who can, if you got any detailed questions on that, he'd be the one to ask. As I said before, we get a single number of chlorophyll A for each year of the period of record, which is a 51 period of record for each RSMBN, the hydrologic model, run. Okay, so we get, for each alternative that's run through the RSMBN, we get 51 numbers for chlorophyll A for these three zones. Okay, if you could please go to slide 27, please. Okay, I'm going over this because you know, a lot of us in working have been immersed in it. We're trying to make sure outside people can track what we're thinking. So the way we would use the model, the metric output, is we would evaluate each alternative. As I said before, there's a single chlorophyll number for each zone that's provided for each period of record. For each year of the period of record, the 51 period of record. And then we can look at, hey, how often does it exceed the thresholds for each alternative? What are the mean chlorophyll A concentrations, because we get that number. And then we also want to be looking at the releases towards each individual estuary during high-risk windows. And also, we can be looking at just magnitude as well. If you have one that's really pegging the scale and it's getting really high chlorophyll A values, whereas another one they're not as high, then that would be a means we could use to compare risk between different alternatives that have been run through the RSMBN model. And the way we are currently planning at this stage to evaluate risk to the estuaries is to look at the volumes delivered to the estuaries during high-risk events. When we have, it's above the thresholds, so we can compare the alternatives over the 51 period of record, which has the higher number, volume, that was delivered for an alternative. We're above 20 parts per billion chlorophyll A and above 40 parts per billion. So that way we can evaluate how much, get a sense of how much algal mass could have been transported to the estuaries. The lower the amount of algal mass or risk transported to the estuaries, the better. And we have some preliminary results from the Pareto runs, and those need to be further discussed and reviewed with the LOSOM water quality subteam. And as I think I've mentioned before, we want to finalize. We've drafted up how we think we want to use the metric, but we need a little further discussion as to how exactly we would use the predictive equations. Okay, next slide, which is slide 28. Limitation slide. Are we in the limitation slide? Okay. So let me say this again. The algal bloom risk metric that we've developed so far is not a predictive tool intended to guide daily or weekly water management operations. It's a tool to help us provide input as we develop the new alternatives, which is using the RSMBN model. That's it. We're not trying to predict how to guide daily or weekly operations. The algal bloom risk metric cannot predict the presence of toxins. We're focused on chlorophyll A. Higher biomass, higher chlorophyll A, more risk for bloom. The Corps recognizes, Jacksonville recognizes the needs. We would like to have a predictive model that uses nutrient concentrations, turbidity, temperature, wind weather conditions, weather predictions, circulation model information, all that information. NOAA has developed a useful algal bloom predictive model used for Lake Erie, and they have indicated that we've been, Dr. Rick Stump is on the team from NOAA, and his crew has developed a useful tool for Lake Erie, where Lake Erie is used as a water supply for a lot of municipalities, and they have a tool that'll reach out a week or two in advance, give them a pretty good handle on where an algal bloom could form, and that allows the utilities to figure out how to allocate where they're going to draw their water from. Did they need to get the water, fill up some reservoir, draw it from the ground, or wherever they get it from? So it's a useful tool that's currently in use, and NOAA believes, they believe they can develop something like that for the Corps or for Lake Okeechobee. That's for all the users, So we've been aware of that since 2016, and we've been trying to get funding. The Corps hasn't until recently, it hasn't been real clear that we had the authority to do it, but with some recent legislation through our engineering and research group, we do have authority to look into these matters. So right now, the Jacksonville District, in collaboration with NOAA, FDP, and University of Florida, and Dr. Gina Ralph is helping us, work this up. We're looking to seek funding opportunities to develop these sort of tools. But we know we would like to have it. It looks like if we got funded right now, it'd be 2 to 3 years in the future before we have that tool. Until then, this is what we have. This metric is what we have. Yep, okay. Next slide, please. Also, there's a parallel effort of review that's going on with our Ecological Center of Expertise, and there you can see the things that they're looking at. And as I said before, we're looking to have the model approval in February of 2021. January would be better.
So good morning, all. This is Gina Ralph. I just want to, again, if you could go back to slide 28, I believe. Just want to re-emphasize the limitations of the model in terms of this is very important for the Blue-Green Algae Task Force to understand what this predictive tool is and is not, this metric. So it's not intended to guide any of our weekly operational decisions. It's going to be one of the performance measures that we use to compare and evaluate potential alternatives for the Lake Okeechobee revised lake operations schedule and manual. We understand and just want to be clear that this does not have the ability to predict the presence of toxins. It simply uses chlorophyll A as a surrogate for the potential of an algal bloom risk. And then we do recognize that there is a need for further tools to be developed in the future, but at this time, we just don't have that holistic capability. And the charge that we're asking for, just to reiterate from Colonel Kelly, is for you all to look at what we have developed utilizing chlorophyll A as the surrogate and help us to understand if what we have right now is good enough for what we're trying to achieve, and whether or not it could be used as a comparison to evaluate potential alternatives for this revised lake operation system operation manual. So just wanted to kind of re-emphasize that. I didn't want it to get lost in some of the translation for the opportunity that were presented here. So if you can go on to the next slide, please. Okay, and just as a parallel path, as Jim was stating, that we have an ecosystem center of expertise within the Corps of Engineers, and we have provided the same materials to those scientists that we have provided to you all. We are currently awaiting feedback from them on their evaluation of this tool, and they were charged with the same types of questions in terms of looking at the underlying theory, the computational aspects of the model, its potential usability and reliability, as well as suggestions for additional tools that could be utilized as a surrogate for algal bloom risk based upon output from the RSM basins model. Again, just that type of output in terms of stage. So sorry, Jim, if we want to turn it back over to Jim, I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on the limitations and the charge to the group. Thank you.
That wraps up for me. Do you have any specific questions? I guess this would be the time. I think we have walk online and Dr. Nada. So if you have any questions on...
Hey, Jim, I believe you made me on mute.
from Walker or any questions on anything I presented.
Something's going on that you're hidden way in the background with your audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I think, okay, I didn't.
Yeah, this is Colonel Kelly. I think we're ready to go to questions.
Yep.
Okay, so just want to thank the Colonel and Gina and Jim and Tim and all of the Corps for running through that presentation. I just want to make a couple of notes in the chat. We did receive the regression analysis, but I'm not sure that we distributed it prior to this meeting. So that was in a Dropbox. It's a relatively large file. We tried to do that during the presentation. So each of the task force members should find that in their email. So again, that's an oversight on our part. So I apologize for that. But I thought that you guys did a nice job and kind of presenting what it is that you've done, how you got to where you are, and what it is that you're asking. And again, for the benefit of the group here, I think we have a couple of tasks in front of us. Again, one is to evaluate whether or not the model itself, the approach is technically sound. It's a very simple regression-based approach. We can look at the computational aspects of the model again and make sure that everything's good in that regard. I think what will be particularly useful moving forward is to think about what the limitations of that model output might be in the context of LOSOM. And then ultimately, as Jim pointed out, what might folks want to see moving forward that would enable folks to make better decisions with regard to lake releases and Lake Okeechobee. So I think I'll just start out. If we can get all of the task force folks back online, I'll open up their videos. That would be helpful. Okay. Let's see if I can move them to the right places so I can see them. All right. So I think we're fortunate that we've got a lot of folks here that have a lot of experience with Lake Okeechobee and understand, I think, what the Corps is trying to do here. I guess we'll just kind of walk through the questions, right? And again, and Jim or Gina, what I'd like to do is have Gina Ralph actually at the Corps kind of direct any questions that we might have to specific staff at the Corps, right? Who would be best positioned to answer those questions. So with regard to the model, and I have one more thing to say here before we get started. There is Bill Walker actually on the line now. Gina, do you know that?
No, we do not know if Mr. Walker is online or not at this end.
Okay. Well, we will hope to find him on the line, but in the short term, I'm going to open up the discussion.
This is Donato. I do see him listed in the panelists. I don't see a mic or a camera affiliated with his name, though. And he did say he was on to me directly.
Hi, this is Devon. He is on, but his audio isn't connected. Donato, I will reach out to you in a second.
Okay, I'll let you guys work on that in the background. So in the short term, again, we have a relatively simple regression-based model that's has been developed, and it relates chlorophyll, or lake stage, to chlorophyll. And again, the goal of incorporating that particular metric into the performance evaluation is to minimize, right, when you run through the scenarios, minimize the amount of exceedances with regard to high chlorophyll concentrations in discharge water. So it's, again, does anybody here have any concerns about the construction of the model for that purpose?
It's somewhat difficult.
Yep, we'll go. Well, I'll try my very best not to have to use the hands thing, but I'll go with Mike first and then Jim next, okay? Go ahead, Mike.
All right. Well, first, I'd like to thank the Corps for considering the algal blooms in the schedule. I think that's an important thing. And I guess my first basic question is I just don't really understand how the equations will translate into a risk assessment. And so, you plug in the numbers related to stage, you get a chlorophyll number. So is there a threshold level? I know we talked about the 20 and the 40 part per billion. So I guess my first question would be, you plug in these numbers, and then if the numbers are over 20 part per billion, that constitutes a certain level of risk, or how would that output translate into a risk assessment?
Okay, thanks, Mike. And again, I'm going to direct the questioning. I'll have Gina, Dr. Ralph.
You can take it, Gina.
Good afternoon, or good morning. This is Gina Ralph. I will direct that one to Donato, Dr. Donato Surratt. He was one of the main authors of the performance measure documentation.
I'm sorry, I was working with Devon offline. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the basic question is, how does the output of that regression equation translate into a risk assessment? So you'll get a chlorophyll value, but what is that? How would that then be used as a risk measure?
So right now, the way we're dealing with it, we have, so like you just said, we get the concentration predicted, and we've gotten, in the Pareto runs, we've gotten output that gives us a percent of events, flow events that are delivering when we have those concentrations that are greater than 20 parts per billion. So you have a flow component to the metric. And you also have one that's for interior to the lake. So when we're above the 20 part per billion, we get a number of those events. And then basically what we're doing is comparing amongst the individual scenarios to see how frequently we're above that threshold. And it could be the 20 or the 40 part per billion chlorophyll A. And then we're taking that and then comparing it amongst the rest of the performance measures to see which ones are giving us the best performance amongst all of the performance measures. So not just limiting it down to the chlorophyll A or algal bloom metric risk. Does that come close to answering your question?
It does, in terms of, I guess regression equations basically give you the the chlorophyll concentration. And then I just quickly looked at the Excel spreadsheet, and I do see where you have frequencies above 20 or frequencies above 40, but especially for the pelagic, it looks like the frequencies above 40, there's not a great fit. I think the R squared was like 0.012 or something. So yes. I'm not sure how that relates then, how the frequency values, for that part, it doesn't seem like it's a great fit. So I'm wondering, how that would be, either translated or interpreted, because I know we need something, and I know the model is really only as good as the data input, but for that frequency above 40, it seems weak. And then also for the pelagic, it seems like all the values are above 20 looking at the regression line. And so everything's above 20. So I don't see the use on that as a metric for the pelagic, at least.
All right, so we're not using the frequency above 20 formulas. So those equations are not being applied in these Pareto runs. So we're strictly using the equations that calculate the concentrations. And then during the simulations, the modelers for the district and the core are actually calculating the frequency we're above the 20 part per billion. So it's not using that other modeling. So it's only the three the three equations that Jim showed in the PowerPoint earlier today that are actually being applied. As far as the pelagic zone, we are still questioning the utilization of that. This recent round of Pareto output was using an older version of the pelagic model, and so it doesn't have the actual version that was sent out for review recently. And as you noted, it's a much weaker R-square on that performance, that component. So we are having to evaluate that post hoc right now and see how we're going to actually incorporate that as we go forward with the next iterations.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
We've got one more addition, Jim.
Yeah, one more thing to consider. This is just personal observation is the winds. If you have a risk on the lake, the winds can move around that algal bloom mass very quickly within days. So I think the two equations that for the littoral zones, if we show a problem in those two, I think we can rely on those to kind of give us a handle on what the risk is in the lake. Just because of the mobility of the algal bloom mass, you form in one part of the lake, the next day the winds could shift and it could move it anywhere, 2 to 3 days.
Okay, thanks, Jim. So we're going to go to Jim Sullivan.
No. I'm just saying. So yeah, wind's not a consideration in the model, but I think if we have one of the equations that show we have risk on the lake, that'll be some good information to help guide us in the comparison of the alternatives.
Jim Sullivan.
Yeah, so if I understand this, I mean, this is really, you're just doing a sensitivity analysis. You're looking at what the lake level is, and when you do discharges, is the algal biomass high? You just want that answer to come up with a schedule. I don't quite understand, and forgive me because I just got the Excel sheet, so I can't look at your analysis on the fly. It seems like you've downsampled a ton of data. You took one chlorophyll sample from May to August and called that's what it is for that time. If you're just doing a sensitivity analysis, why don't you just use all the actual real data we have? Why do you need to model this? And just find out at what points is it high over all the years of data we have. We have real-time data constantly coming out of Lake Okeechobee. So I don't quite understand why it's being done this way, but maybe if I could dig into your Excel sheet, I would figure it out.
Gina, would you like to direct that question to probably Dr. Walker if he's on, or another appropriate individual?
Yes, if Dr. Walker is on, I think he would be the appropriate person to address that question. If not, Dr. Surratt.
Okay, I don't think there's an
Sorry, we're working on getting Bill on here. That is the appropriate question for Bill. So I'm working with Devon right now. So if we can go to maybe another question that I could actually answer, then.
I just wanted to say quickly that I had typed in almost exactly the same question into the chat. Like, if we have regular measures of chlorophyll A, why do we need regression equations to determine chlorophyll A?
I would have to assume that it's related to the fact that the scenarios are being run from the RSMBN, and we don't have the ability to predict the chlorophylls in the future with just the raw data. So we kind of need to model.
But you're not going to use this as a predictive tool. You're going to use, as I said, from my understanding of what you just said, this is going to be a sensitivity analysis to come up with how you schedule things in the future. You're not going to just, okay, we're going to use this during operations. You're going to use it to develop how the schedule of water releases could be helped by looking at this. Is that not true? You are going to use this in regular operations as a running model?
No, this will not be. This is only going to be utilized during so right now it's gone through the Pareto process, and then it'll go through the iterations. As we stated earlier, we will have to optimize how we're going to be utilizing these models as a result of the output that we just got from the Pareto, particularly for the pelagic zone approach. So I'm not.
Yeah, this is Colonel Kelly. Maybe we can help simplify this a little, Tim.
Sure. Yeah. Let me. I think it all goes back to the purpose of what this metric is for, and it's for helping us compare plans that we're developing in a planning framework. The hydrologic model simulates a 52-year period of record for each of the plans that we develop. So we have unique hydrologic data from those models that we can't use real-world chlorophyll A data for that evaluation. So this metric helps us develop for each of those plans based on the hydrologic model data output what a projected chlorophyll A concentration might be for that unique model run and that unique set of hydrologic data. So hopefully that kind of clears up the question a little bit.
Yeah, again, I just want to think about the intent of the model, right? Again, the model is to provide an output variable that's linked to a hydrologic model, right? And then it'll allow you to evaluate various plans, right? And so the intent is to reduce the number of plans moving forward. You know, at present, you're trying to narrow it down to 9, and then ultimately, later in 2021, you'll have a preferred plan. So I just want to make sure that people understand what this model is being used for and what it's not being used for, right? It's not to make decisions on a daily or a weekly basis. It's strictly for the planning purposes up front.
Just to add to that, we recognize the limitations of the model. We recognize that we are not going to utilize this for operational decisions. And as we previously noted, we recognize the need for a holistic predictive tool. The purpose of this metric, similar to the other performance metrics that Tim referred to as part of his presentation, is a comparison of alternatives. So we have 120,000 initial screening runs. Some of them perform really well for the lake. Some perform really well for the estuaries. And we can utilize the output from that RSM basins model to see those things. So what we're trying to do with this metric is use chlorophyll A as the surrogate tied to the RSM basins output, again, which is limited to just stage and flow, and see if there's some type of correlation that may help us to separate and sort plans from those plans that provide a high risk for an algal bloom development from those that provide a lower risk. And then we utilize all of that information along with similar information from other performance metrics, such as discharges to the estuaries or the actual stage within Lake Okeechobee. And based upon all of our authorized project purposes and objectives for the LOSOM project, that's when we utilize that as part of our decision-making criteria. And again, it will all be compared and evaluated, and this is just one, albeit simplified tool that we can use to help screen potential alternatives that reduce the risk for a potential algal bloom. So hopefully putting it in that framework, it might help a little bit with some of the lines of questioning or discussion today.
Thank you, Dr. Ralph. So we have, I see a series of hands. So Evelyn, then Wendy, and then Val. So Evelyn.
Yeah, I just wondered, you know, since this ability to predict chlorophyll from stage, you know, the coefficient of determination on that model is lower than we would want it to be for the intended use. And I just wonder if you isolate the summer data, you know, summertime is when these blooms are most likely to happen, and use a summer prediction base to set summer thresholds. If you would have any greater opportunity for reducing your reducing risk and improving the models that way.
Thanks for that question, Evelyn. The model is specifically designed for the summer events. So it goes from May to August is the focus period that he's calibrated it for. So I think he's captured specifically what you're identifying. And the littoral south and the littoral west components of the model are performing with an R-square of around 0.7. We are really low on the pelagic side, but what we think that means is the chlorophyll A is not as responsive in the pelagic zone to stage variations. And I think Jim was trying to hit on that a little bit when about the wind driver of how it can easily move the chlorophyll A blooms around within the lake.
Well, can I ask just a quick follow-up, Donato, on whether when you talked earlier about the evaluation of the frequency of exceedance that is used then to evaluate the different scenarios, is that frequency of blooms over or frequency of exceedance and chlorophyll over time or over space?
So it would be each year per scenario. So it's going to represent the lake as a whole, but it'll be each year per scenario. So you get I think it's the 51 runs, and you're going to have a frequency of event per, of that year over all of those scenarios. So that's how you get that percent of greater than each threshold. But I think Bill has joined, so I think he can now answer questions.
Frequency over time and space.
I don't want to say space because it's you have the littoral west, the littoral
as one. I see. Okay.
Hi, I'm sorry. This is Bill Walker. I'm sorry. I finally figured out how to get connected on the audio side here. I've been listening to the whole meeting. Yeah, as Donato said, the model, the Y variable, the predicted variables is the May through August average chlorophyll A concentrations in each year, and that's correlated with the stage metric. Now, it is true that the R-squared for the pelagic was lower, but if you look at the standard errors, it was actually more accurate. The residual error is much lower for the pelagic zone. So all the regression models are telling us is that the pelagic zone chlorophylls are less sensitive to stage than in the littoral zone. And I think that reflects some of the mechanisms that go on in the lake, especially the littoral zone being more sensitive because the higher stages will, snuff out the submerged vegetation and the resulting lower uptake of nutrients in the littoral zone, combined with the higher turbidities, tends to generate more nutrients and trigger the algal blooms. In terms of translating this into a risk, we can't just take the historical data and map it directly onto the RSM output because the RSM is simulating, different future management scenarios. There's no way to map the historical data directly onto that, so we have to take this indirect route using the regression equations. And to express the result as a risk, I think Jim listed this, for example, one of the we have a time series for each alternative. We'll get a time series of summer average chlorophyll A concentrations in parts per billion for each alternative. And then that would be translated into a metric such as percent of years with chlorophyll greater than 20, % of years with chlorophyll greater than 40. And then by mapping that onto the discharge, you similarly calculate the percent of the total volume released to the estuaries exceeds 20 or 40. So I don't know if that's helpful or not. I'm sorry I was late getting on here.
So I think that actually gets back to Dr. Parsons' original question. And so Mike, does that help you?
Well, Wendy's hand's getting very tired, I see, but it does help me, but I'd like to hear from other people before I have some follow-up questions.
All right, go ahead, Wendy.
All right, I'm gonna just throw all mine out at once and, apologize in advance that we're reacting to only 2 out of 4 of your documents and we've had them for a week, but.
Hi, Wendy. Wendy, this is Donato. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry.
Yes.
But Dr. Walker has an urgent meeting right now that he has to attend.
Oh.
And I'm asking all of you, is it possible that we can get back to questioning him at around 11 o'clock?
I need to be leaving at noon, so I need to get my questions out soon.
Yeah, we're gonna have to, work with the time frame that we've got. And so if Dr. Walker has to leave, we'll work through as best of our ability, but that we'll proceed. Wendy, go ahead with your questions.
So it seems to me there's 2 leaps of faith in this system. One is the relationship between lake stage and chlorophyll, and the second is the relationship between chlorophyll and microcystis and microcystin. So there's 2 things. And related to the first one, which is what we're talking about now, it seems to me that the relationship is fairly tenuous. It ignores a lot of things. I understand it's tied to what the model can predict, but the model is driven by a lot of the factors that I understand affect algae blooms, like high temperatures over the long summer season, or high rainfall causing high inflows that have high nutrient content, and having shallow water after a long stagnant period all of a sudden get these inputs. So it seems to me that the weather drivers are available. So maybe that's something for the future, but it seems to me they've always been available. And I have 2 other things that just struck me as I looked at the 13-page document. Like, why are we doing a log regression for a variable that's only varying from 0 to 40? Usually we do that when we have orders of magnitude differences among, and we're trying to make sure the low values don't get lost in the high values. I don't really understand that, because when you take the log of numbers between 10 and 40, you're getting things down between 1 and 1.6, and it's getting really small. And the second issue that jumped out at me is the model does not seem to be doing a good job of pulling out the problem years, like 2018. When I look at what it thinks for 2018, it thinks everything's great. Or if I look at 2006, I think Jim mentioned 2006 and 7 were problem years, but the model thinks everything was pretty good in those years. So has a retrospective analysis been done to say that this model would predict problems in the years that we actually had problems?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Graham. So this is Gina Ralph. I captured 3 items. The first one was with regard to the type of weather information that's available. And again, we do recognize the limitations of this model in utilizing the RSM basin's output as what we have available right now to compare alternatives using that model. And again, we recognize that we are working with others to try to develop a more holistic model that will take into account all of the factors that you listed. Before we get to the second one, which I will turn over to Donato, I believe Dr. Walker had to leave. The other one was with regard to 2018. I just want to clarify for everyone that our modeling period of record goes from 1965 to 2016. So we are not able to model at this time anything post 2016. So therefore, we weren't able to show whether or not there was a good fit with that year or not. In terms of why did we use
about figure 2 in the document, you do go through 2018 and figure 2, predicting chlorophyll from something.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, for predicting chlorophyll, I thought you were talking about the actual model output because the period of record is different. I'm going to turn your questions over to Donato for the log regression, as well as for the 2018 chlorophyll and why it may not be a fit that you had anticipated. So, Donato?
I don't want to make it up. Like I said, Bill is going to be on a break until 11 o'clock, and I could pontificate on it here, but I don't want to do that and butcher his work. So I'm going to have to leave that one to him. We can get back to you with a response in the future. We can get the question recorded and sent back.
Sure, I mainly wanted to get my questions out there because I have also a conflict later.
Can I just follow up on one of Wendy's questions, just as a comment that as you move forward toward a more predictive model to, and I'm sure you know this, but there's a lot of models out there predicting chlorophyll and predicting blue-green algae specifically from in lakes similar to Lake Okeechobee around the world. And I just would encourage you not to reinvent the wheel, that there are some pretty powerful models. And I think of like Lake Taihu in China, where they're predicting within 80% accuracy where and when blooms will happen within with a 3-week window or something really, really powerful for doing the kinds of things I think we all hope for, which is managing for a healthier lake from week to week. And I do really hope that effort moves forward.
Thank you, Dr. Geiser. We're hopeful as well. And if you have anything that you would like the Corps to consider as we move through the process of developing those types of tools, please send any information our way.
Okay, Val, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. So I'm still, I think, a little unclear on all the overall goals. So these models will predict are based on Lake Okeechobee risk of blooms. Ultimately, we're trying to understand blooms downstream, right, during flow periods and everything. So that the two are a bit decoupled. One of the things I just wanted to mention was it seems like some of the basic biology of the algae themselves, of course, isn't and can't be captured by just chlorophyll A numbers themselves. But so one aspect that potentially would just be the seasonality of the bloom itself. And we talked about that a little bit in terms of this is already only looking at the period from May to August, but the growing phase of the algae is such that it's going to be much, much more active in the April to June time period than probably later in the summer. And in fact, when we have seen these really bad downstream blooms, my recollection is that it's usually early when the releases are early, like in May. I know at least a few years ago, that was the case where Memorial Weekend was just like, the total bloom situation in the St. Lucie estuary. So I'm just wondering if I don't know how simple this would be, but to look at this more on a monthly basis than on a whole aggregation for the whole period of the summer, because if you do a release early when these are in their really active growing phase, it could have a very different outcome from doing a release later when they're less active in the growth period and everything. I'd be interested in maybe what Jim and others might have to think about that as well.
I can't speak for Jim and others, but Bill did do.
I'm sorry, I meant Jim, Jim, our task force member, Blue Green task force member. Sorry.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get Jim on this real quick.
Well, I mean, it was what I was trying to get at. I mean, when you're done, when you're sampling, essentially taking a whole year and turning it, or a whole growing season, summer, whatever we want to call it, into one point, you're downsampling data that might be valuable. So I agree with you. Doing it with a little bit more temporal fidelity might be a very instructive thing to do. So I do agree with you on that.
So Bill did attempt to do a sensitivity analysis, and he incorporated more months into the regression models. And the further he got away from August and May to August period, the weaker the models performed. So the less response we were seeing with respect to the one of two variables that we get out of the RSMBN output, which is the stage. So I think it just it boiled down to the fact that the strongest relationships were occurring when the algal bloom concentrations were starting to be the higher levels, and you could see a relationship between stage. But again, this is another question we could bring back an answer from it when we can get Bill to respond.
I'm curious too that, I mean, I assume this hydrological model could be tied to any environmental parameter. Doesn't have to be chlorophyll, could be temperature, whatever. Just a single variable though, that it's measured. Did you first do an analysis? There might be something environmentally that correlates better to chlorophyll, and then you could transfer, suppose it's temperature, it's something very simple. Then you can do your model, your hydrological model connected to temperature. It might work better that way. I'm not going to say it will, but it might.
Could I just add a bit to that? I mean, this is a very simple one driver, one predictor model, but I'll go back. Just because you only have one thing coming out of the hydrologic model doesn't mean you don't have other covariates that you could use in this regression analysis. You have summer mean temperature. You have antecedent conditions for whether it's been a dry season or a wet dry season. I mean, there's lots of things that exist just in the weather data that you have that are driving these models.
Yeah, I mean, there's niche models that take multivariate environmental data and then see, what actually is the driver. You could basically take that kind of concept and marry it to a hydrological model. I mean, this is a lot more complex than doing a simple linear regression where it's just one thing. And we have computers now. We don't have to do Excel sheets and simple linear regressions anymore. So it might be worth, we don't have the time. I understand that the Corps is under a real serious time crunch right now. But there may be more elegant ways of trying to do a better job of this risk mitigation.
Yes, I see Evelyn's hand is up, and I just want to make a quick point, right? So there's a couple of things that I want to make sure that we capture here today, right? Again, so we all recognize, I think, the simplicity of the model that's being employed, right? And there are some basic questions there, right? Is it an appropriate model to run regardless of the limitations, right? That's one thing. But then you quickly getting into the realm of, well, what might you do, right, to improve your ability to forecast, right, or be more comprehensive and holistic in your approach. And so I think, we'll continue to have this conversation right now, but I'll try to capture those elements and keep them slightly separated, because I think they fall into, what do we have now? Is there anything fundamentally flawed with that model, right? And then there's how can you improve it in the shorter term, and what are your aspirational goals down the road? What would we really like? And so those are all different things. So let me go back to Evelyn. I think she had her hand up.
Yeah, I put it back down. A lot of what we've been talking about is spot on, with the kinds of concerns that I have.
Oh, okay. Then I'll go to Mike and then Wendy.
Yeah, I think the thing that should be considered would be the pre-existing conditions, if you will. We know, for example, for 2016, the bloom seems to have been related to, a wet, dry season, as Wendy says, where we had a lot of rainfall in January. And in 2018, it really had to do with Irma and the after effects of Irma and some of those legacy nutrients. So they were pre-existing conditions that probably played a role in leading to the blooms the subsequent summer. And we know the summer then represents the growing season. The other thing I would add into here is there is a positive relationship between stage and chlorophyll. And so if we look at the beginning of the growing season in May, what are the conditions in May? You know, one thing I would like to see tested would be if you have a high water stage in May, how would that project out then to, you know, higher chlorophyll levels later in the year? And we know when you start with a higher stage at the end of dry season, you're going to have to discharge more water once wet season comes around. And I know last year the core kept water levels lower, stage levels lower. And, you know, maybe coincidentally, or maybe because of that, we didn't really have large algal blooms or large releases downstream. So I'd like the Corps to consider keeping those stages lower in the dry season, especially near the end of dry season, where, you know, you have that baseline or that starting condition that really it looks like it has an effect on what the growing season's going to be like for the algal blooms, in particular with microcystis, that we know is all a big concern.
Sorry, wait.
No, that's okay. So, I mean, it looks like we had Wendy, then Val, excuse me.
Oh, I thought Jim was going to react to that issue. I mean, what I want to say is something totally different. So
okay, Jim, to that point, Jim, if you want, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. I agree with Mike a lot that it appears like keeping the lake level, you know, and obviously there's issues with this that other people want it higher. But when the 1 year the Corps kept it at 10.5 or 11.5, I forget what it was, it seemed to mitigate some of these issues. But thinking that, are they going to test this model out with theoretical keeping it at a value below 12.5? I mean, are they going to test this? What happens if we change that regulatory low limit? That would be a good outcome to see come from this. And also, are they going to hindcast? Essentially, as Wendy was getting to, are they going to see how it does to predict the known events we've had? And if it doesn't, then it's not that useful. That's your answer right there.
And just to follow up on that one, that's what I'm talking about in this figure 2 here, that, you know, the key years, I think, because of those antecedent conditions that Mike mentioned driving the problem years, stage didn't seem to be a particularly good predictor on those years. I mean, just look at this figure for 2006, 7, 2017, 2018, all those chlorophyll levels are low. So the models would say, no problem, discharge or whatever. So I think that retrospective analysis is important. But what the other point I was going to make, and since I have the floor, I'll just make it, is given the uncertainties associated with this predictor, if it were moved forward in the process, how this performance metrics were balanced against other performance metrics that are better understood and better known is really important. So this metric is going to drive things low. All the slopes are positive. It's going to drive things low. And how confident are we in the area that it's going to drive compared to some of the other metrics that are being looked at? And I don't really think that trade-off of the metrics has ever been very clear.
So Wendy, I just want to kind of, but I know Dr. Ralph was going to address that, but I want to make sure I clarify something. So essentially, I mean, there's 51 performance metrics or slightly more than 50, I don't remember the exact number, but what you're saying is that, hey, this particular metric, right? And if you optimize for that, you're trading off something somewhere else, right? And so what you're asking for is some type of an optimization routine. Is that correct?
No, I'm just asking how when whoever is making these decisions sees these various performance measures, how they trade the uncertainty associated with this one with other performance measures. So one thing is sort of the trade-off of uncertainty. I mean, the other is the trade-off of everything. you know, what we're going for, but,
Mhm.
you know, it's a pretty uncertain performance metric.
Okay, Dr. Rao?
This is Donato. I did want to comment on the low chlorophyll A concentrations that Wendy was describing. So as a part of the modeling effort and the filtering of data, Walker did filter out the hurricane years. So we are underperforming as a result of those not being included in the model. And that's what you're actually describing, are those years when that were identified as the hurricane years.
Yeah, but what I'm concerned about is those are years we know were problems and the model is not picking it up.
Understood.
And I guess to that point is the reason that they filtered out the hurricane years is because your options are constrained essentially by high water. I mean, do you know that?
I apologize.
Well, I would argue though 2018 wasn't a hurricane year. You know, 2017.
The result of 2017's hurricane.
Yeah, and so, but 2018 is not included in the data. And 2016 wasn't a hurricane year, but it's not showing up in the data. And, you know, those were our two most recent big algal bloom years that are the reason why we're sitting all here right now. So.
Okay. So this is Gina Ralph. I wanted to get back to the question that Dr. Graham had with regard to uncertainty and how we were going to utilize this performance metric in conjunction with all of the other performance metrics that have been identified. And I would encourage anyone who's really interested, we're going to have a project delivery team meeting tomorrow where we're going to look at those 120,000 runs. And what we've done is we've looked at several of the performance measures and evaluated those for a single metric. For example, looking at the lake stage envelope, so stages within the lake that are conducive to lake vegetation. So what we've done is we've looked at the best performers for that metric. And then we've, in conjunction with that, enumerated what the potential trade-offs would be if we only formulated and picked plans that met that metric. And we've done that for a variety of the metrics that we've looked at as part of this Pareto sorting. So we have an abundance of information that tells us if you prioritize one thing over the others, this is what the potential trade-offs would be. And we'll be discussing that tomorrow. And as the Colonel and Tim both mentioned, in the end, we're looking for a balanced plan that meets all of the authorized purposes of the Central and Southern Florida project, in addition to the objectives that were identified for the study. So we have to look at, you know, not taking the best performer for one metric over another, but how can we achieve something that, you know, I don't want to talk about shared adversity, but something that, you know, is okay for many of the metrics together and gives us that most balanced performance. So I'm not sure if Tim Geisen, if you wanted to add anything else to what I've just said, but I do think there's a lot of information that we've gone through with regard to our initial data analyses, looking at how each metric performs and what the potential trade-offs would be with the other objectives. So Tim?
Yeah, I think one thing I would like to add to that is at this point, there is no weighting of any of the objectives against each other. There is no weighting of the performance metrics for each of the objectives. So right now, everything is considered equally. And that's the intent that moving forward is to have things considered equally. However, if there's discussion in the sub-teams as we move forward for specific objectives, the metrics that comprise evaluation for that specific objective, if there is reasoning to weight those metrics within that specific objective, that's something that can be entertained.
I think, Mike, you wanted to jump in there real quick.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I'm fully in support of the Corps considering chlorophyll as a metric. And so I know we're coming across a little critical here, but it should be, and I'm glad they're doing this. I want to make sure that comes out. Yes, they have a short timeline. They're basically looking at how a stage affects chlorophyll. Really, it's not how chlorophyll affects the stage. So, when they have these 120,000 different model runs and they get a stage result from that, then they're going to look, okay, well, how did that affect the chlorophyll here? And so the fact that they're considering that, I think, is very important, and we all need to remember that. And I would be interested in tomorrow's meeting, depending on when it fits in, and if we have to go. I don't know if we're going to go through all 120,000 of the scenarios. That's a long day, but I think that's important, and I think we need to kind of refocus a little bit on. I like Wendy's comment on, okay, well, this stage output's going to affect chlorophyll this way, but it's going to affect these other things as well. So how is that going to, and I know, tomorrow it sounds like Gina said that we'll go into that more. There are uncertainties here, but I do not want chlorophyll taken off the table here. I don't want to be so critical of it that we're taking it off the table. The output is good to going in. There's a short timeline. So is what is being proposed going to be questioned? And are there any considerations we need to really think about more clearly on with the error or with the concerns on is this model is trying to capture, so we can use it as outputs. Basically, that's what it comes down to. So is it when we get this stage result and we see a predicted chlorophyll value, is that going to be useful, and is it going to be accurate enough for what we're hoping?
So Mike, unfortunately, I think you were, wasn't just me, I think you were kind of cutting out quite a bit on your discussion there. But I think if I would summarize, I mean, I would say, well, I think folks appreciate that chlorophyll is being considered as a metric, right, moving forward. But there is a great deal of, or a considerable amount of uncertainty. And, but what can we do and what can we think about moving forward, right, that allows us to make better decisions. We don't want to take it off the table. We're happy that it's there, right? But, again, we have to appreciate that there's a great deal of uncertainty, right? And some limitations as a consequence of that uncertainty. And what are those limitations? Let's get at those. Wendy?
Yeah, one thing that would help me, I appreciate we have this spreadsheet, but I can't find what I'm looking for in it. We have 3 equations in this 13-page document. It would help me XY plots for lake stage versus chlorophyll for both the calibration period and the evaluation period, for the however many 18 points or however many points we're looking at. Seeing a function of time isn't as useful to assess, what do these R squareds and standard errors really mean, and where are they larger, just are the errors here, and that kind of thing. So I'm sure it would be really easy for somebody to generate those and share them. It would be helpful.
I think I would be interested, if I don't break up here, stage in May. So how does this model run so we know what the stage in May is at the beginning of the growing season?
And that does seem to be very important in terms of downstream effects. Because I think ultimately that isn't, I'm getting a little bit of a disconnect. I mean, there is a bit of a disconnect between what the chlorophyll A levels are in the lake and what happens downstream. Of course, there has to be some algae in the lake to cause a algal bloom when the water's released, but it may, and I don't know if this has been done either in the literature or as part of this exercise, whether that is predictive of the magnitude of these estuary blooms or not. I do agree with Mike Parsons that it's really good to see these considerations, the blue-green algae considerations being considered.
Thank you, Val. So I'm going to direct this back to Dr. Ralph real quick about, I guess, how the May data might have been incorporated into your process.
You said you were directing that back to Mike, right?
No, I think Mike is interested in knowing if you were to use the May data, if you might have a little more ability or a little more utility. And I think Val has agreed with that. What I'm trying to figure out is in the effort that's gone on by the Corps, did you consider that scenario, for example, where you used May data only?
Well, I think that's not quite it. I would say, what are the various scenarios that result, let's say, in either the lowest May stage or the scenarios that result in lower stages in, let's say, April, May, June. So as they run these 120,000 different scenarios, how, maybe that should get weight from a chlorophyll point of view.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying, Mike. I got that.
Could I ask a question of clarification of Donato? The regressions we're looking at, their average chlorophyll over May through August. Are they average stage over May through August?
Yes, they are average stages over May through August. You get one number for it.
And then when you go to the risk metric, you're going to be using daily stage?
It's still aggregated to the summer month stage. Mike, I'm really not, I don't know that I can break down into that. So it seems like you're describing, you want the RSMBN output to focus in on April through May. But the chlorophyll A metric is focused in on May through August. So I'm not really understand. It seems like you want to get to antecedent conditions, but then what were you trying to understand as a result? And then how do you want the chlorophyll A to play into that?
Mike.
Yeah, my clock was just dinging. Basically, that would be, your antecedent condition would lead to higher chlorophyll levels if we're working off of the assumption that chlorophyll is positively related to stage. So the idea would be if you have a higher stage at the beginning of growing season, you will have more chlorophyll through growing season. And so if the Corps is running different scenarios resulting in, variable stage levels, what scenarios would result in lower stage levels April, May, June? And then because if that was fed into the chlorophyll risk, regression equations would result in lower chlorophyll levels.
Okay, so what I'm actually hearing is that sounds like we kind of need another, maybe it's not the right word, performance measure, but we need another set of indicators to be incorporated. So I'm gonna have to kind of move that over to Gina to see if she can weigh in on that one. But I think it's something we could pull off, but I don't know if it's something that's—
I would say what Mike might be saying is that you want a lagged model. You want to look at, take stage at the end of the dry season and use that as the explanatory variable for chlorophyll over the summer, not the average over the whole season. That's what I understand.
Yep. I think that's the way to, at least try that, because, it may give you a much greater prediction power, see if it does. And if it does, it does seem like it would really, guide those potentially lower risk scenarios. Using April, May to predict June, July or something. April, May stage to predict June, July blooms.
So Wendy has helped me understand the question. So that is something I can go back and talk to Walker about and see if we can incorporate a lag and see what the result would be. I don't know the timeline on that though, so have to be careful there.
So I'm gonna
I would just say, if I could, Tom, quickly,
ahead, Mike.
I think you can still run the hydrologic model looking at those different scenarios that would, and look at the results that would have lower stages in April, May, and June. How those outputs would then affect chlorophyll is kind of a separate question related to the metric. But if you're looking through all of these scenarios, I think looking at those scenarios that would result in lower levels in April, May, and June would probably be beneficial based on what we know right now, from a chlorophyll point of view, at least.
Dr. Ralph?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. But we've got a little feedback.
Okay. Can you turn off the main?
Hey Gina, this is Devon. Are you listening on two different devices? If you are, you will need to turn one of them off.
Okay, so I don't know who's supposed to be talking right now, but while they work on that, listening to what Mike offered seemed to be slightly different to what Wendy's interpretation was. Given what Mike is suggesting, so having the actual stages from output from April to May, and then saying what happened in the model runs, I think that's something doable. I think we have to talk to the core to see if we can get that as an output going forward. The lag modeling approach where we actually are predicting chlorophyll A from the April to May for the bloom period, that's a different story. And that's something I have to work with Walker on and see if we can get that pulled off in any time that would actually happen and be valuable for the iterations coming up.
So again, I'm just trying to capture some of this here. And so what I'm gathering from the task force right now is that there's utility in exploring both of those scenarios. The one that Mike suggested, hey, let's look at those scenarios that result in low lake stage in April, May, and June, and see how they play out, right? Ultimately, with regard to chlorophyll. And then Wendy suggesting that, in fact, we revisit the model. Go ahead, Wendy. Oh, I don't want to put words in your mouth. You're on mute.
I was going to say, you can't see how they play out unless you model. I mean, you can look at the stages and you can say, based on our knowledge, we want them to be low, but you won't be able to get chlorophyll at the end of the growing season without the model.
That's correct. No, I understand that.
Dr. Fraser, this is Ava Velez from the Corps. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Ava.
Good morning, task force members. I see that our folks in Jacksonville are having a little bit of a hard time with the sound, so I'll try to step in for Gina to answer the question about whether we would have time or the ability to look at the April and May stages to help as an indicator, to help us better understand the result of the regression equation. The answer is yes. We would be able to take a look at that, and thank you for that suggestion. We'll take that back for discussion and with the team.
Could I ask Ava a question?
Go ahead, Wendy. Yep. I was just
Could
making
you also look at summer temperatures as a covariate? So you've got initial lake stage summer temperatures, and then, you know, some of those other climatic variables that are driving both the hydrologic and presumably algae production.
Good morning, Dr. Graham. I think that I need to check with the team, because my understanding of the environmental or hydrologic information that's available from the RSMBN that we have now might be limited in on that side, but that doesn't mean it's not available. So if you could let us take that back and think about that with the water quality sub-team and the modelers, that would be helpful.
Yeah, and let me just be clear. I'm not talking about an output of your hydrologic model. I'm talking about a climatic driver that we have. Another covariate.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm tracking what you're saying. Similar to the way that Dr. Walker analyzed stage, right? You're thinking, would that be something that we could consider as a covariate? I'm tracking.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'm looking for hands. So again, I'm not seeing any right now, so I just want to make sure that we're in a position to make sure that the Corps gets the best advice moving forward. Again, you know, I'll go back to the beginning so we understand what the model is that they have in hand. We recognize that it's simple. It just simply relates lake stage to chlorophyll, but there's limited utility as a consequence of that, right? And there's a fair amount of uncertainty. So there's a suggestion moving forward to entertain a couple of things, like consider using the April-May stage data as an indicator, and then also thinking about using other climatic variables as covariables in that modeling effort in the short term to improve the predictive capability moving forward. So, and I think those are all reasonable things, you know, in the short term, you know, and to get back to what the Colonel said before, I mean, information will continue to evolve, our techniques will get better, but this is still not quite where we want to be, right? We're trying to fiddle with something in a short time period, but really what we want to be able to do is to forecast with much more certainty moving forward. And so what type, I guess I'd like to evolve this discussion a little bit to figure out what is it that we should be measuring, right? And what types of things should we be pursuing moving forward that might be more informative. So I'll open it up there.
So this is Valerie. I just kind of want to go to a point I made earlier, and I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I'm sure I don't know the answer to this, and I'm not sure if it's known, but ultimately, well, of course, we'd like to prevent blooms in Lake O itself, But what happens in Lake O and what happens in the estuaries when there are freshwater releases may or may not be completely coupled. Obviously, you need some algae in the lake to get into the estuaries, but it may not have to be high bloom levels in the lake that lead to high bloom levels in the estuaries. And that decoupling might further complicate how useful just chlorophyll A or any single metric might be. And I'm not sure what modeling tools, perhaps Wendy and others might have some ideas about this, but there's clearly something to how much water, the amount of flow is a very critical factor, of course.
Yeah, I think those are good points, Val, for sure. I mean, and again, I would kick this back to the core to ask, how, when they're evaluating things, what is the linkage between what happens in the lake, right, and what you might anticipate or expect in the estuary as a consequence of a particular release regime?
Hey, Dr. Fraser, this is Ava. Oh, pardon me. I wasn't sure if you were directing that to me. Pardon me, Dr. Parsons.
That's okay. We'll go to Mike first and then to you, Ava. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. This is a little bit different, but related to it. I think there needs to be some consideration of adaptive management as well. If there's, if the wind blew a bloom right up against one of the locks, for example, how would that be considered in terms of discharges so that bloom would not be discharged downstream? I don't know if that will be incorporated into the new LOSOM or not, but I think it should be. And I know in 2019, there was a flexible schedule interpretation that the Corps used. And so I'm wondering in the future how that would come in play, as these blooms move around. You're not relying on the model now, you're relying on observations.
Yeah, that's real-time data.
That's exactly right, Dr. Parsons.
This is Jim Riley here. Can you hear me?
Jim, hang on just 1 second. Dr. Parsons, I wanted to take a moment. This is Ava Velez again. I wanted to take a moment and explain, because you're right on target there. There's a difference between our evaluation of model information, which is where the algal bloom risk metric comes in, and then we would take all that model information, develop a schedule in model world. And then, so that's why Colonel Kelly was emphasizing July of 2021. What happens after that is we take all of that information, all the effects and everything we've learned, and we actually write the operational plan, so the instructions to the operators. And so what you're describing, we would and want to include in that writing of the operational criteria that begins in 2021 and actually ends when LOSOM completes in 2022. That's that next part of our process. So the first part is, can we have something that allows us to consider relationships in model world? And then with what we learn, we then write instructions to operators that allow us to consider many different environmental conditions that are on the ground, week to week, day to day, like Colonel Kelly does now with our partners. So as he said a little bit earlier, the Corps looks at all the monitoring data and the information provided by the state of Florida with all of our partners, and everything that the stakeholders provide in our periodic scientist calls to make operational decisions. That happens today, and that would happen again with LOSOM. We just hope that it would be more robust, more flexible, have the ability to incorporate data as we learn more. So that's the operational criteria part, which does come in the LOSOM process, and it is written once our models are complete. So I wanted to make sure that that was clear today, that we do have an opportunity for that as well.
Thank you, Ava. And again, I think that was really important because, I mean, LOSOM is a complicated process, right? And there's a tremendous amount of work that's gone into this. And our goal here is not necessarily to kind of rethink that whole process, right? The goal is to evaluate a tool that is that you have in hand now that is being considered as part of the planning toward that end. And so I think we're getting there. I think we've had some good feedback. I'm going to just make sure that I get as much of it as I possibly can before people have to jump off, because we're constrained today with time. I see, Wendy, you have your hand up. Nope, you took it down.
I have a question
Go ahead, Evelyn. Sure.
related to this sort of post-operational plan period 2021-22. It seems like a lot of learning could go on during that time, but it's just a year. And if we're using a model that aggregates, across or within years, I wondered if it might be more prudent to have a sub-annual predictive tool that then could be tested and validated in this operational period. Instead of using a model that's predicting annual, based on annual input, something at a little bit higher resolution that then could be, validated and used to provide a much more nuanced operational guidance. Does that make sense?
So
it seems like we're using a course tool to do something that actually plays out on a, on a shorter time scale, and that we can't really make use of that operational period unless our tool is actually working on that same it's the same sort of timeline.
So I guess what I'm going to try to put it in a different way, right? So we have a planning tool that's fairly coarse, right? But, as we move into the operational phase, is there an opportunity to take finer temporal resolution data, right? And make use of that? Is that?
No, well, no, I'm just saying, like, the tool is based on annual averages of this, seasonal data. And it seems like developing a sort of secondary tool or something based on a metric, based on finer resolution information that we already have, and then using that to evaluate, to suggest the risk of different operational scenarios that play out within a year.
Yeah.
Right. And then you kind of adaptively manage based on where you are relative to the prediction. Is that?
So Ava, I see you nodding up there. You want to go ahead and pop in?
Thank you, Dr. Gaiser. That's actually what we would hope to have in the future. If you think about that slide that Colonel Kelly presented when he presented the request to all of you, he had 4 bullets, and the top 2 were, does this initial idea make sense? And then we know we need to do more. We know we'd like to predict with more fidelity. We know that as we look forward to operational decisions, we include a lot of points of data for many different parts of the system. And so we do think that that is the future. And so I just want to clarify one thing, because I think I might have not explained it as well as I should have. The period of from July of 2021 through 22, that's still the LOSOM process where we would be writing the operational criteria. We certainly continue to learn as we go. Like, we're learning now in the current schedule, right? And then we'll continue to learn as we move forward. I didn't mean to suggest that we would only use that 1 year.
Okay. I guess I'm just thinking that you might have the opportunity to have something between this very simple metric and a full-blown predictive model, and that employing such a thing in this kind of period where you're beginning to implement could be a wonderful learning opportunity and a way of validating that doesn't depend on hindcast data that's going back into scenarios that may not represent the kind of scenarios that we have in the future. And that there's opportunity there to like sort of, you know, validate and come up with a robust plan for the future.
Geyser, this is Gina Ralph. Hopefully you all can hear me.
Yep, we can, Gina.
Okay, we're glad to be back. Sorry about the technical difficulties. But what we'd like to say is we concur with Dr. Geyser, and that's why we have started the development of more of that holistic predictive model that could be used in that very manner. And I agree, it would give a good opportunity for validation as we move forward with the process. It is a continual learning curve, and we're always looking for more robust, holistic tools that we can apply to help with our operational decision making. So we appreciate that. Thank you.
See Val and then Jim.
Yeah, mine is more of a technical point. It's just one thing that's in this 13-page document, which you kindly shared with us. Thank you very much for that. It was helpful. On page 9, it talks about, so it kind of follows along in our discussion about future tool development. So on page 9, in the first paragraph under 6.1, it's talking about models and tools that are being developed. And it says that the blue-green algae task force is presently working on such a modeling tool, and it should be available in a few years. To my best knowledge, we're not doing that. So I just don't want anyone, I mean, Dr. Fraser can comment on this, but I don't want anyone, I don't know how broadly this document is distributed. I don't want anyone currently expecting that.
We are not going to deliver that. You're exactly right.
Yeah, so that caught my attention as well.
Okay, good. I just want to make that clear that hopefully no one would hold their breath for that.
And again, we'll give the Corps an opportunity to go back, look at that 13-page document and revise it if they need to, and we will post a revised version of that document on our website. Mike? Oh, excuse me, Jim, you were first. Hold on, I'm sorry, Mike.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the tools that are going to be coming in the future are obviously going to be far improved from what we have today. And it's a very near future. And I do know the Corps said they were working with Rick Stumpf. We've worked with him in Lake Erie as well. I'm really curious, has the Corps engaged NASA, you know, instead of just NOAA? And I know they partner and they work together, but NASA leadership in the earth sciences are always looking for ways that their satellites can be used to help society. And they fund a lot of this type of work routinely. You know, and I'd be glad, I know people in NASA, I'd be glad to approach them if no one in the Corps has, but they should be an important partner in this because they can image Lake Okeechobee. It's big enough, and you don't have to model if you get good satellite shots of the lake. The algae floats. It's easy to do the CI index, which is the how much actual microcystis is in the lake, not just chlorophyll. We can get that data right now. It's just a matter of, can we get it at the fidelity you need it? It's getting better and better with the Landsats that we have up now, but there's going to be a lot coming down the pipe, and I just hope NASA's being engaged as much as NOAA.
Dr. Ralph?
Oh, are we on?
Yeah, sorry, had a double mute problem. This is Colonel Kelly. Absolutely appreciate that, and I think you hit a good point, right? So we are coordinating. Certainly, NASA is involved. I think we've leaned on NOAA to lead that coordination, but would absolutely love any contacts you've got to kind of get us a more direct connection, and we'd really appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, I will make sure. I don't know if we have your emails or who we should put as the POC for this, but I can introduce you to the people that would sponsor this kind of work.
So
we'll
Jim,
email you directly.
Jim, if you want to just provide that to the folks here in the task force, and then we'll coordinate that. So we'll keep it all in the right channels. Okay.
All right, no problem.
Absolutely. Gina will go direct. Awesome. Thanks.
Okay. Mike?
I had two comments, I guess, since we talked about some of the future scenarios a little bit. One would be with some of these scenarios probably already being run and discussed tomorrow would be moving water south. And so how that would come into play, and would that be under greater consideration with a lot of the restoration programs, of course. And the second thing ties into that 13-page document that Valerie brought up. I meant to bring this up earlier, but it said that and this is probably a question for Donato and Bill mainly. It said the calibration period was 1999 to 2019, but the testing period was 1987 to 2018. So you have overlapping calibration and testing. So I was wondering if that's true, or if it's a typo. You know, should it have been 1987 to 1998 was testing, and 1999 to 2019 was calibration. So I was wondering about that. That's more of a Bill Walker question when he comes back on. But that overlap is a little, I guess, concerning or puzzling. And so I just wanted to get those 2 points out. But thanks.
Yeah, it's a good question, Mike, and I think we should see clarification on that. So Gina, can you direct us to the appropriate person?
First off, to address the flow south, as one of the performance metrics that we will be looking at flows not only to the estuaries, both northern estuaries, but also flows south to the Everglades. We do have output that shows different plans. Again, we looked solely at, you know, if we wanted to send water south, what are the best of those conceptual plans that do that, right? And then what are the trade-offs associated? So we are looking at that to determine how we can send more water south. That's one of the features that we'll be exploring as part of the LOSOM process. And then in terms of talking about the calibration, I would defer until Dr. Walker rejoins us. It's my understanding he should be back around 11. So when he joins us, we can send that question directly to him. Thank you.
So Dr. Parsons, to add to Gina's point about flow south and how LOSOM is looking at that while we wait to hear from Dr. Walker, this is Ava Velez again. Wanted to add to that a little bit. We are going to update the assumptions for sending water south from Lake Okeechobee in LOSOM. We are doing that. We are also going to update our operational criteria related to sending flow south from Lake Okeechobee to the Central and Greater Everglades. So I just wanted to make sure that was really clear. We are updating that. One of the ways that we're looking at that is by evaluating the different ways, we call them modes of operation, but the conceptual plan analysis that you've heard about today did look at different modes of sending water south. We had a recent team meeting where we described that. You know, sometimes you can send water in a uniform way. Sometimes you can divert water away that would otherwise go to the northern estuaries and send it south. And sometimes you can try to send water south in a way that mimics a restoration type condition, right? You send it a little bit higher as you were rounding the corner from the wet season towards the dry season, so that you can try to mimic a nice recession from the wet to dry and look at the system together between Lake Okeechobee and the Greater Everglades. We're evaluating all of those possible nodes in LOSOM, and we'll continue to do so in the coming months.
Great, thank you very much.
Jim? I think you're on mute. There you go.
I didn't lower my hand from last time, sorry.
Okay, you're off the hook then. All right, so I'm not sure that.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Wendy. Sorry.
I just wanted to clarify something that is going on in the back of my head that I think Donato said before. There are 3 different regression equations for littoral west, south, and pelagic, and that any excursion above these thresholds at any one of the 3 sites would cause a performance metric to be triggered. Is that true?
Donato?
I'm sorry, will you repeat the question?
I was just trying to clarify at one of the conversations earlier today. I thought you said that any excursion of predicted chlorophyll A above a certain threshold at any of these 3 sites would trigger the performance measure for the
Performance measure, then you cut out, but your mouth kept moving.
Do you want me to say it again?
Yes, please. Wendy, yes. Can you, for the benefit of everybody?
I just wanted to clarify. We talked about how the pelagic model is not very accurate. And I think you said if one of the littoral zone models predicted an excursion above one of these thresholds, it would indicate the whole lake is at risk and therefore the performance metric would be triggered.
Oh, I hope I didn't indicate that. That was not my intention at all. So we have 3 components for the lake. So it's not, we're not treating each one of them to act for the whole lake. So we're only using them independently. So we have a littoral west, a littoral south, and then a pelagic. What I was saying about the pelagic zone is that it's pretty weak right now. We haven't, as the water quality sub-team, decided to incorporate it into the evaluations as we go into the next iterations. Right now, we're just considering it from the Pareto or the conceptual plan modeling effort that's taking place so far. So right now, we're going through the process of evaluating those output and seeing how they influence the various plans that have been produced. So I'm not suggesting that if you get a increase over 20 parts per billion in pelagic, then we're saying that the whole lake is in jeopardy. That's not the point. Yeah.
Okay, I thought there was something about winds and blowing things around that made you say that. Okay.
Okay. So I think we've had some pretty good discussion, and I have enough information at this point, at least. I think the core does, hopefully to.
Council, I think Bill has joined us back or has returned. It looks like
Bill?
his phone is connected. He might just need to unmute himself. *6.
There we go. Yes.
So Bill, I guess one of the outstanding questions for you is, can you provide some clarity with regard to the calibration period and the testing period? Is there overlap there?
Well, yeah. Well, the calibration period is defined. I think it was 99 through 2019, and then all the historical data were used for testing independently. And the problem with lumping all the data together is that the lake has changed, especially in the littoral zone. So some of the the model doesn't apply as well to a historical period. We're trying to calibrate it to the time period that reflects more recent operations. I just wanted to mention that Donato just mentioned the Pareto analysis, and I've looked at them. That generates a table of the various metrics they're using. But, and we pointed this out early on, that the regression equations for chlorophyll are redundant, really. They're highly correlated with well, the bloom frequencies that we predict are highly correlated with the frequency of stages exceeding the ecological envelope that's been defined for the lake. And that Pareto analysis used the envelope for sorting purposes, but when I go back and look at the simulation results for all the chlorophyll metrics, they're highly correlated. So in a sense, this is supportive of that ecological envelope, and they're both telling us the same thing, namely higher stages will generate more chlorophyll. And even though the R² value is lower for the pelagic zone, there's still a significant slope, and that's enough to cause roughly a doubling in chlorophyll over the stage ranges that we're looking at when you look at the annual values. So that's just some supplementary information. Now, as we get further into analyzing the Pareto analysis, we can show those results if people are interested.
Bill, something else. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Dr. Surratt.
Something else that played out during the meeting while you were away was the concept, two actual concepts. One that focused on using the April to May stages, particularly when they're low, to try to give us an idea or predict what will be happening during the bloom period. So that was just looking at the output. But then there's another concept, which is using a lag type approach, a lag model.
Yeah. Well, I've been working on this for quite a while, and I started off looking at all kinds of metrics and correlates, and I don't have off the top of my head whether they expressed it that in particular, but I know I looked at correlations for individual months and different definitions of summer. I ended up with May through August, which is basically a period when the highest chlorophyll concentrations are observed. There are some blooms, of course, that occur in October and so forth, so that doesn't necessarily capture this directly, but in a sense, if the stage is high during May through August, then the September to October stages are also likely to be in the upper range. It's not a perfect correlation. So we have to aggregate the data to develop a model like this. We can't, the more we slice up the data, we end up with separate regressions for individual periods or finer spatial resolution. You end up with a lot more residual error and noise, and you don't have as much power for calibrating the equation. So this is, typically when we do lake modeling, at least at this level, the empirical type, we aggregate the data, and what you're looking at in terms of the product as it exists now is, where I landed after a lot of analysis. And we certainly have time to go back and revisit things, and I have already seen a list of several lists of questions that we can address in writing.
Okay, so I just want to make sure a couple of things. I see Wendy has her hand up, and I'm going to go in order here, though. So with regard to the overlapping calibration and testing, Mike, okay, Wendy, you want to go ahead and talk about that?
Yeah, I'm still not clear on that. Bill, we're asking if there is a typo in the document, because it said the model testing period was 1987 through 2018, which overlaps with the calibration period. Is that correct?
That's a typo. That's a typo. There must be a typo. Yeah.
So with that input, Ava or Dr. Ralph, we'd like to give the Corps an opportunity to go back into the document and make sure that they proof it, and we can repost a revised version of that document so people have the most accurate and up-to-date information. Okay, so then the last part of that had to do with the lag And so what I'm understanding is that we can certainly, you captured, Dr. Walker, a number of the questions and that have been raised here, and there's an opportunity in the short term anyways moving forward to make some adjustments to the modeling effort to improve it. And so you'll take those into consideration in consultation with the Corps. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Mike, I see your hands up.
One thing I would ask Dr. Walker to consider if he has not done so already. I know he said he ran a lot of analyses on this, so he may have covered it already. But maybe one way, instead of lumping the summer months together, would be averaging all of the Aprils over 10 or 20 years and then averaging all of the Mays. So you still kind of get that monthly slice. And then maybe we could explore this lag that Wendy's interested in.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I know I looked at looking at, if you think of it as a matrix, just a two-way table where X is the month and Y is the stage. You calculate the average chlorophyll and you generate like a contour diagram. And that gives you a sense for how, the patterns that exist within each month in terms of the relationship between chlorophyll and stage. And I presented that probably in the first LOSOM meeting, and we can certainly provide that information. But in terms of explicitly the lag, we can look at that. My sense is that that's something worth looking at, but I'm not sure that it will have much effect. But the spreadsheets, that I have, exploratory spreadsheets, have the capability of doing that, and I can, work that up for you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Walker. So again, I'm going to try to be respectful of people's times and commitments that they have today. I want to get some public comment in here as well. So I feel like there's enough information and discussion thus far to, work through some of the objectives that the Corps had for the task force, really, and to evaluate whether or not the model itself is sound, and can we express some of the limitations and the utility of the model as it exists in its current form. How we might make some improvements in the shorter term and things that might be considered, and then what are some of the more aspirational types of goals as it relates to forecasting and incorporating harmful algal blooms and algae into the process. So we can, I know you guys have your own notes. We'll compile some here as well and provide that to you, so it's of as much benefit as possible. Is there, I think I don't see any other hands at this point. Is there any comments from the Corps they'd like to make before we take a brief break?
This is Gina Ralph. I'd just like to thank everybody for the discussion this morning. Thank you for the helpful and constructive feedback. And if you need any additional information from us as you go through your review, please just reach out. I believe my email has been provided to all panelists for that purpose. And just thank you all for your time this morning.
Thank you, Gina. All right, so Mike, you've got something on your mind? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I want, since Dr. Walker is back, I wanted to also ask him with 2018 in particular and 2016, they weren't hurricane years. And so if there was a way to reincorporate those data, because we're missing these extreme events and these bloom events, and I think it would be important to try to capture them in the calibration or modeling effort. So I wanted to ask him what his thoughts were on that.
Well,
go ahead, Bill.
In those years, though, as I recall, there wasn't the chlorophylls were not were not high. They were much lower. They tended to be much lower than in the other years. I was trying to just use the year, eliminate the years where there was, part of it has to do with, the hurricane occurring in September has in this lake has an effect sometimes for many years, but it certainly carries over to the next year. But the pattern in the data was such that in those 2 years, the observed chlorophyll was lower than what was predicted by the model. So the model, in a sense, gives us a conservative forecast. We can't predict they don't predict hurricanes per se in the RSM model, so we can't build that into the equation. So I thought it was better to sort of focus on the years with higher responses, where the lake was more stable hydraulically, and it generated the highest chlorophylls.
Yeah, Wendy, to that point, I know.
Yeah, so my question there is, we know 2018 was a bad year, 2016 was a bad year, 2007 was a bad year, but the chlorophylls are low. Kind of calls into question the utility of a model based on chlorophyll and stage.
A bad year, what do you mean? Bad year is measured by what?
Algal blooms.
Not by chlorophyll.
I know. I'm talking about 2018.
Okay, so what's your algal? We're using the best metric we have, the chlorophyll. That's where we have the longest and the most data. So when you say there was blooms, what metric are you using?
But that's in the estuaries. Again, it goes back to the point that the estuaries and the lake are decoupled a bit. And they were horrible blooms in the estuaries.
It's why this task force exists, was 2018.
2018 showed up in the satellite from NOAA's satellite information with Rick Stump.
Yeah, I'll just jump in real quick. And so I think what we would recognize is that there's a fair amount of uncertainty in the modeling, right? With using strictly the chlorophyll data that's available. And there are lots of considerations moving forward, and it's that uncertainty that we're recognizing and commenting on here, which limits the utility of the tool. And we just have to recognize what we can do with this and what we can't, and we're going to make some suggestions on how we might improve it moving forward. So I think everybody is on the same page actually at this point. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay, I am seeing none at this point. So I want to thank the Corps and their team for the presentation and engaging in the discussion. And we will, certainly I'll compile some of the comments here in a manner that addresses the bullet points as laid out by Colonel Kelly, and try to get back that information to you. But you've heard the discussion as well, and I'm sure that won't keep you from starting some of these things in the short term. So I see, Wendy, did you want to say something before we take a break?
Yeah, I wanted to, before we take a break, understand the agenda for the rest of the day, but I also wanted to understand the expectations, because there were some things on those slides from the Corps about something happening by December 10th and all that sort of thing. So I just want to make sure before this is all over, we all understand what the expectations are, and if something comes out with the Blue-Green Algae Task Force said, what that means between now and December 10th.
Fair deal, right? And so I think, again, that what the Corps and the Colonel, I would welcome Colonel Kelly to chime in when I'm done here, right, has asked, again, first to us to say, hey, we've shared our model with you, right, and its most simple form, essentially, right, and do we understand what that model is about and what is involved in that model, what its limitations are, right, and because there's uncertainty, obviously we recognize that there's uncertainty there. How does that affect its utility moving forward? How might we improve upon that in the short term? And again, what are some things that the Corps and its partners or collaborators might consider moving forward that would provide a much better product. So I think that we can capture that information in a narrative, right, and provide it to the Corps. And I'm happy to try to do that prior to the 10th. I'm not sure what the 10th, the meaning of that is. I don't know.
I don't want that to come out as a task force consensus document with less than 3 weeks for us to deliberate.
And then we can, Wendy, we can take as, you know, what I would do. I mean, I can't, as you know, right, we operate in the sunshine, and I wouldn't simply be able to capture this in a consensus document and distribute it without meeting again. So we would have to do that, right? But what I'm saying here is that the Corps has heard that input, and it doesn't preclude them from acting on the information that was provided here today. Colonel Kelly.
Yeah, so thanks, Tom. This is Colonel Kelly. So just to reiterate, I mean, what we're looking for at this point in time is to get kind of a thumbs up, and I don't want to say it any differently than that, because I understand kind of the state of play and whose signature is on the bottom of what document and whatever. But you know, we're trying to be as transparent as possible and use the best information we've got as we walk through this. So, you know, bottom line, is this a good enough method for us to do a comparative analysis for potential opportunities, so we can make the best decision possible in July for a lake schedule analysis to achieve balance? And then absolutely, you know, we will 100% continue as things go in time to use better scientific data to inform operational decisions once we've got a schedule in play. And we've got many, many mechanisms by which we can do that as the science becomes better, as we learn more, and as we can continue to use all of the outputs of all of forums like this, like we do today. So we don't, this is not something where it gets locked in July and we never do anything for the next 10 years until we do a new schedule. But what we have to do is have to use something to make an informed comparison for the potential alternatives that we can get to. So I hope that makes sense.
That makes sense to me. So, I mean, I would go back, and again, I'm not trying, you know, my job here is to facilitate the discussion and the dialogue and try to compile the comments and provide information that would be beneficial in this particular case to the Corps. So I think what I've heard is that the task force members are appreciative of the fact that the Corps is considering a biological metric, you know, in their process moving forward. I also heard that the task force say, you know what, we understand that this is a very simple approach with a great deal of uncertainty surrounding the use of this particular metric, right? And it limits substantially its utility. What the task force is, excuse me, has suggested is that there may be ways in the very near future that you could improve on your efforts, right? And but they recognize also that with much more effort and the expectation of advances, technological advances and other types of advances moving forward, that we would hope to get to a more comprehensive, holistic forecasting tool. And you know, that's an aspirational goal that we could certainly talk about. But to get to Wendy's point, I'm not interested here in, you know, signing off on this as the tool, right? You know, I think we can recognize that this is one approach, right, with the data that are available. And we recognize that our goal here is to provide information that's going to be useful moving forward in the Corps' efforts. So I don't see this as signing off on you know, their efforts. We're not, it's their job, right? It's not our job. Is that a way?
I also wonder if just some simple improvements could be made, or at least considered, such as, you know, not leaving out important years from the development and of the tool. We heard that those critical years like 2016, 2018 weren't considered because they were unusual, but that to me seems to make them extremely important in considering as well.
Sure, and again, to that point, Val, you know, I think careful consideration and justification for why they included or excluded with data, you know, that's something that the Corps needs to be aware of, right? They need to be able to defend those decisions moving forward if they're going to incorporate this into their decision-making process. Okay. Let's go ahead and take just, let's maybe a 10-minute break. All right, I was gonna say 5, but 10. All right, and then we will come back and we will get some public comment, okay? All right, I'll see everybody at 11:40.
The microphones will work.
Okay.
And you should be totally good.
Okay, so we should probably put it back on mute for now.
All right, so it's 11:40. Let's make sure we can get folks back on the line. See Wendy. Let's see. Evelyn. Jim. I don't see Mike or Val yet. Okay, there's Mike, and Val might be close to a commitment. So we'll go ahead and move forward. So at this time, we are going to move into the public comment period, and I'm going to hand it over to John. John?
Thank you, Dr. Fraser. As a reminder, to ensure everyone has a chance to comment, comments will be limited to 3 minutes. If you're participating via Zoom and a computer, to speak, use the raise hand feature. If you've called in via phone, pressing *9 on your phone will raise your hand. And again, *6 will mute and unmute your line when it's your opportunity to speak. Bear with me, folks. I'm just pulling up our list of public commenters. It appears up first, we have Paul Gray. You can now begin your public comment.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, this is Paul Gray from Audubon, Florida. This has been a very interesting conversation. As you guys all know, we wish we had a more robust model, and the Corps is working on those, but they're not going to be ready in time. And so the question is, you guys are all scientists, and you can look at those R-square values and say, well, they're not as high as I want, and I would be not real confident in predictions. But we also know the adage that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And so the question about this model that I've been puzzling with, and I hope you guys will weigh in on as you comment on it in the future, is the model useful for what we're trying to use it for? And what we're trying to use it for is a comparison between alternatives 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 to tell the public, this alternative will get us probably into less algae risk, and this one will put us into more algae risk. And does this model actually give us a pretty good assessment of the less and the more question? And if you think about who's going to be looking at these performance measures, it's a lot of lay people who are professionals in something, law or business or something, but they're not scientists, and they don't know to look at the R values. And so, if we decided this is not robust enough and we threw it out, well, I know that it's highly correlated, like Bill said, with stage envelope. When you're in deep water, you're at a higher algae risk. But the public doesn't know that. And so if we don't have an algae performance measure, and we have to commend the Corps for trying to figure out how to do this and recognize that it's been a short amount of time. If we can't give the public an algae performance measure, then they would look at the stage envelope and not necessarily know that when you're above it all the time, you're in an algae concern. And so that's my question. And I hope you guys will kind of weigh in on this as you go forward is it useful for the purpose it's intended, is to compare different alternatives and say this one's relatively more risky for algae and this one's relatively less risky. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your deliberations and your time.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
Our next speaker will be Tom McVicar. Tom, you now can speak.
Thank you. My name is Tom McVicar. I assume you can hear me?
We can hear you, Tom.
I'm a water resource engineer in South Florida. I am not an algae expert, but I've been working with the Lake Okeechobee operations for in excess of 40 years. The problem I've got with the algae metric and the idea of this algae metric, if you can put it into the planning context, and I totally agree the Corps needs a real-time tool to adjust their operations when there's a serious algae bloom present. The problem with putting this in a planning context, you've got 47 or whatever other metrics that are backed by years and probably decades of science. This one has the most emotion and the least science. A year and a half ago, the Corps published a proposal to do a planned deviation based on harmful algae blooms in the lake. It was a pretty well thought out plan, but they were constrained by the Herbert Hoover Dike. They did not model. There's two basic scenarios. You can drive the lake lower, hoping you get rain to make that up later. Drive it lower before the algae season, hoping to avoid releases in the algae season, and hoping that you'll get rain later in the year to make up for the water you put out. The other idea is when you're operating the lake and there is algae present that would threaten the estuaries, you don't make releases. That's a perfectly valid option the Corps has. They did not feel they had it while the Herbert Hoover repairs were still under construction. They will clearly have it when the next schedule comes about. The Corps didn't model those two alternatives. We took the Water Management District's Lake Okeechobee screening model and ran both of them. The option that lowers the lake preemptively, and doesn't take much of imagination to figure that out, it has a whole lot of negative consequences for all the other metrics that are used to manage the lake, and certainly used in a planning context for the lake. The idea of if there's algae, you hold it in the lake, it made almost all the other metrics better. It was much better for the snail kite. It was better for the estuaries. Less water went to the estuaries. It was a lot better for avoiding minimum level violations in the lake. It had half of the minimum level violations that the preemptive release idea did. I think this idea still has a lot of merit. We prepared a technical memorandum summarizing all the results of the modeling and sent that to Colonel Kelly. It's probably been a year and a half ago now. I'd love to make that available to this committee and let you look at it. I think it's a more realistic way to allow the Corps to operate real time when they've got algae present. You don't have to go through all this science and reliability of models and things you do in the planning context. You can see it on the satellite. It's a problem. Let the Corps have some options. And I think there are options available much better than the idea of preemptively lowering the lake every spring. Thank you very much for what you're doing. You're having a big impact on a lot of issues in South Florida, so I appreciate all the time you're putting in. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Next up to speak is Greg Smith. Greg, you can now speak.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. Good morning. My name is Greg Smith. I'm CEO of HSC Organics. I'd like to thank this esteemed board for hosting this meetings for all of us and the progress they're making finding solutions to our problems. This board was formed in response to environmental issues we're all facing today. We know what they are and we know what's causing them, so there's no point in recapping any of that. We started contacting the Department of Governments 18 months ago about this. And we were moving along fine, but then the direction changed and we were directed to follow the IFR program put out by your board. At the end of that, when we weren't receiving any response, I checked into it and I was told that I now need to set myself up as a vendor. The RFIs did not really ask questions pertinent to what we were doing, but we did our best to fill them out. And after reading the Florida state statutes, we don't really fit under, I don't believe the vendor status is what we're looking to do. So I'm not here to push a product. What I'm here to do is hope to arrange a verbal discussion with one of you or someone you're working with in the Earth Science Department to get an answer as to what road we should be on before we start down another one that may not lead us to where we're trying to get. And leaving this on a positive note, three things that I saw come out from this pandemic. And one is, given the opportunity, this planet wants to recover fairly rapidly. The Ganges turned blue, and we saw downtown LA for the first time in a long time. Two, the people of the world can cooperate as a global community when it's necessary. And three, conventional science can move very quickly, as we saw with the new antivirus. And and get things done. So it seems to me if we all cooperate and move quickly, the environment will fix itself and these problems will get moving down the road with it. That's all I have to say. And I would appreciate a call from anybody. You all have my contact information so I can find out what road I should be taking in order to get to where we want to be. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. And so I want to make sure, in fact, that we do have your contact information. And so we can get back with you to address your issues as they related to the RFI. So before we go to our next speaker, Christine, if you're on the line, can you verify that we have contact information for Mr. Smith?
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I had to switch my mic. I actually don't know if we do. The best way to probably get us your contact information would be to email the email address that we'll have on the comment slide at the very end, and that will ensure that we're able to get all of your contact information.
Okay, thanks, Christine. And Mr. Smith, if you've heard that, at the end of the public comment period, we'll have a contact email address. And if you send us that information, we'll set up a time to make sure that we can respond to your queries. Okay, next speaker.
Our next speaker is John Cassani. John, you can now speak.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. John Cassani, Calusa Waterkeeper. About a year ago, the task force had indicated a priority for developing defensible standards, water quality standards for defining impairment, and in a public health risk context for swim advisories. I know we spent some time in July talking about that. The task force did. Not seeing anything since then in that context, or at least following EPA's guidelines as recommended more than a year ago. So today we heard again about using chlorophyll as a surrogate or proxy for cyanobacteria with a great deal of uncertainty associated with using that metric. So I'm suggesting that if the task force could move forward to define water quality standards for the two cyanotoxins, that would have informed this regulatory process. So we wouldn't be speculating about whether chlorophyll is an appropriate proxy or surrogate for cyanobacteria. We provided some messaging to the task force earlier this year why we think chlorophyll is not a good proxy. Based on how it's sampled versus phytoplankton, two different protocols for sampling that bring uncertainty to using chlorophyll as a proxy for cyanobacteria or cyanotoxins. So we'd like to see the task force moving forward, deliberating on what they had established as a priority, that being defining defensible standards for cyanotoxins. So I'm hoping in the future meetings we can move in that direction to bring some more certainty to both the management and the regulatory process. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
And next up in queue is Joe Galileo. Joe, you may now speak.
Can I be heard?
We can hear you, Joe.
All right. One of the items that was brought up by the task force is the use of the Landsat photographs. If I understand it correctly, not only does that give you chlorophyll A, but it also gives you the particular chlorophyll that is found only in cyanobacteria. If that is true, a differentiation can be made on the analysis of those that Landsat data, so that just because you have chlorophyll A, as some other people have said, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's only related to the cyanophyte population. It's not. It does vary. So that's maybe something that could be looked at. And the second part of that is, how frequently does the cyanophyte population, predicated on looking at the particular cyanophyte chlorophyll vary with time? If it happens in a very short period of time, is that sufficient, or does it make it more difficult for a model to work in terms of release or non-release? Another issue is that there are, in my opinion, two forcing functions that the core is faced with, which are very, very difficult. One is that the inflow of water volume will not be reduced coming into the lake by the ASR reservoir project. That will store water, but it still has to return it back within a given period of time. And if global warming is increasing the amount of water coming into the lake, that makes the core's problem even worse. The second thing that I found, and it's a study that I'm in the process of finishing for publication, showed that over a 31-year period of time from DB hydro data, that as the chlorophyll goes down, chlorophyll A goes down, the Secchi disk numbers go down. In other words, it becomes the mud production, whether it's a high stage, a low lake stage, regardless, with time over 31 years, the transmission of light for SAVs and chlorophyll goes down, as does chlorophyll go down. So these are issues that have to be addressed. And quite honestly, from my perspective, in Martin County, we do not want to see any discharge eventually into the C-44 canal from the lake. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Giglio. John, if we can go to our next speaker.
Next up, we have Ernie Barnett. Ernie, you can now speak.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Ernie Barnett, and I am the Executive Director of the Florida Land Council, but I'm also a resident on the South Fork of the St. Lucie River, so this issue is very important to me personally and professionally. I think I want to thank the task force members and the chairman for a very, I think, very robust discussion about a proposed metric that I don't think is robust enough to provide any meaningful utility in developing the appropriate regulation schedule. When you have a simple linear regression model that only takes into account, stage and flow, you're masking a lot of the actual cause and effect type factors, such as the previous speakers have mentioned: wind, cloud cover, light transparency, nutrient loadings, antecedent conditions leading up to the bloom are just completely masked. That's further complicated by this aggregating data over long periods of time to a single data point for the season for both chlorophyll A and stage height. I think this is just really, as someone who's done water quality modeling in the past, I think it's extremely limited in its utility. Further complicating things is been no demonstration of the real strong correlation between just the complete chlorophyll A analysis and microcystin, which is really what you're trying to get at. We see a lack of statistical relationship in the littoral zone, littoral west, the S77, and the pelagic zone. So it's just I think needs a lot more work and thought put into it. I also want to caution some of the task force members in this sort of mantra of just simply lowering the lake going at the end of the dry season. The lower lake stage inherently means more discharges to the coastal estuary. There's limited capacity in conveyance to send water south and treatment. Those constraints have been well documented. And what ends up happening what ends up happening is, and we saw this in the conditions leading up to the 2018 year, and then in 2019, this drawing the lake down, extreme high levels of nutrients were brought into the estuary. And in the St. Lucie this past year, as a carryover, we had extremely low salinity in the South Fork, very high turbidity, and very low transparency and high nutrient levels throughout the entire year with very little lake discharges during the summer months, when you would no lake discharges during the summer months when you would be worried about blue-green algae blooms. So what we really need is a regulation schedule, not high, not low. We need the right regulation schedule that's better for the estuaries, better to stay in the lake envelope, ecological envelope of the lake, and provide water for the Everglades and the other water-related needs of the region. And it's not a high versus low, it's what's the right stage, and just caution you from advocating a particular stage at a particular time of year. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnie. Next speaker.
Next up, we have Mike Elfenbein. Mike, you can now speak.
Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday Eve. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and I'll try to keep it brief. I'm a simple mind. A lot of people on this call, a lot smarter than I am, and I think this task force has been around for a little bit more than a year. I think going on 2 years. And as a stakeholder, much to my dismay, I hear the conversation being had about how to mitigate the symptoms of blue-green algae blooms, and not the conversation we should be having, which is how to keep those algae blooms from happening to begin with. And I think all of us know, regardless of our level of education on these issues, is that these algal blooms rely on nutrient loads to exist. And we can throw chemicals and different solutions at the symptoms, but I don't think that we're achieving the goals of what this task force is supposed to be doing. I know that I have worked really hard as a stakeholder to try to bring solutions to the table to address exactly what I'm talking about. And I am a little frustrated to see the delay in having those things move forward. I saw recently that the DEP publicized a $1 million project to mitigate blue-green algae in the C-44 canal, but I've not seen a return on what that $1 million got us. Did it accomplish anything? Have we gotten any further as a result of that project? What are we doing? Where are we going, and where are we headed? And how can folks like me help us get there? What can I do to help this state and this task force and this agency achieve the goals, not of mitigating the symptoms of blue-green algae blooms, but how do we stop them or limit them from occurring and limit the intensity and frequency of those blooms? So I don't know if you can address my questions, but I think I made them pretty clear. Thank you guys so much for your time. I appreciate all your hard work and effort.
Thanks, Mike, for the comments.
Next up, we have Richard Budell. Richard, you can now speak.
Thank you very much. My name is Rich Budell. I'm up in Tallahassee. Like Tom and Ernie, spent a lot of my career working on Lake Okeechobee issues, more than 30 years on lake management issues, particularly. I certainly want to echo the comments that Tom and Ernie both made prior. I think another thing that I can add is that like the discussion today from the task force, which was very robust, and I enjoyed it very much. I appreciate the effort. The water quality sub-team itself, part of the PDT, there's still a lot of question within the group of folks that are working on this about the utility of this proposed metric. So I don't want the task force to think that there's any kind of unanimous consent among the water quality sub-team that this metric is ready for prime time for the very reasons that you've all discussed here today. I think one of the points I'd like to draw attention to is one that Wendy made, and that is that we are concerned that using this metric in its current form is going to preferentially select for lower lake levels. And for the reasons Ernie and Tom described, lower lake levels don't mean less discharges. They mean more discharges to the estuaries. And in doing so, in using this metric and preferentially selecting lower discharges, lower lake schedules, you're masking the other responsibilities of the Corps. You're masking the effects on flood control and water supply and navigation and endangered species management and the lake stage envelope. All of those, it appears to us, take a back seat to the utility of this metric in the screening process. I just, this is not a pilot project. You're developing a lake schedule that's going to impact the lives of millions of people for a long period of time. And I realize that it's an iterative process, and the Corps is going to try to integrate new measures and new steps to improve it. But at the bottom line is that you're going to have a lake schedule in 2022 that's going to be the lake schedule for probably another decade. And that's not going to allow for the kind of adaptive management and the implementation of kind of learn as you go strategies if this tool is utilized as currently constructed. So I urge you to be cautious. I agree with the comments that Tom made, particularly about the flexibility the Corps already has using real-time information, real-time data to make day-to-day, week-to-week, and month-to-month management decisions. You don't need to use this kind of a, I think, abrupt and inaccurate screening tool to arrive at your new strategy to manage the lake. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Rich.
Next up, we have Marissa Carozzo. Marissa, you can now speak.
Good afternoon, Dr. Fraser, Task Force. I'm Marissa Carozzo here on behalf of the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. I'd really like to say we appreciate the opportunity to comment today and say thank you to the Army Corps for the presentations and the task force itself for the really informative discussion on this idea of a proposed harmful algal bloom risk metric. I'd also like to take a moment to just emphasize how significant it is that we are having this conversation today about incorporating harmful algal bloom risk metrics into the development of the Lake Okeechobee regulation schedule. And that will hopefully help us compare alternative scenarios, especially in the interim until we have other predictive models available. We are also pleased to hear today that predictive models for AJBs are a priority for development, even if they are still several years down the road. And it sounds like that there is still a little bit of flexibility for the Army Corps to take into account the recommendations of the Blue-Green Algae Task Force, including looking at some of those April and May stages that were brought up and those timeframes. So we are looking forward to reviewing the Blue-Green Algae Task Force recommendations on this topic. And we also look forward to your future discussions on the other strategies that we'll need to employ to continue to address the sources of nutrients throughout our watersheds and really get to stopping pollution at the source so that we can prevent harmful algal blooms from impacting the lake as well as the estuaries into the future. So thank you again for the opportunity to comment, and we look forward to the rest of the discussion today.
Sorry. Thanks, Marissa.
Next up, we have Barry Rosen. Barry, you can now speak. Barry, your line may still be muted. Please unmute your line.
All right. Barry Rosen with Florida Gulf Coast University Water School. I work on cyanobacteria and have for 45 years. And I do have a project on Lake Okeechobee looking at the harmful algal bloom dynamics. I can tell you this much, it's very complicated. There's maybe 4,000 to 6,000 organisms in a liter of water. The cyanobacteria are there, including microcystis, but there's a lot of other cyanobacteria that don't bloom that compete with it. And also keep in mind that they're there year round. They're not just suddenly popping up. The conditions have to be just right for them to bloom. They have to have the right temperature, nutrients, everything else, and not being eaten by other organisms. So the microcystis that blooms is heavily dependent on having enough phosphorus. And for it to be toxic, it also needs ample nitrogen. Both are really critical. Also know that the canal system is full of these same cyanobacteria. They aren't suddenly showing up in the canal system just from Lake Okeechobee. They are washing downstream during these heavy outpours that might happen from the lake, but there's also a robust population in the canal system. So if microcystis is there and there's not enough phosphorus for it to grow or not enough nitrogen in particular, there's a whole nother suite of cyanobacteria that can bloom, and they co-bloom in the lake that fix their own atmospheric nitrogen. Used to be called anabina, it's now Dilocospermum. The 1985 bloom in the lake led to the whole swim program for Lake Okeechobee, the swim plant. So keep in mind that it's almost like whack-a-mole. If we suppress one particular organism, another one might crop up and bloom. I wholly support the idea of if there's a large bloom in the lake and we want to protect the downstream estuaries, then we need to see how much water we can hold without threatening the integrity of the dike and not causing an even larger push of water later on if we do get a hurricane. That's the whole idea behind the regulation schedule in the first place. So with that, keep in mind that it's complicated and it's not a silver bullet. And I think this metric mixed in with all the other important ones on flood control, water supply, and everything else that goes into that LOSOM modeling, it's perfectly fine to be in there, but it really can't tilt just to the harmful algal blooms. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry, for those comments.
Dr. Fraser, it appears those are all the commenters for today's meeting.
Okay, thank you, John. So I guess, I have a couple of questions for the task force moving forward. And to get to Wendy's point earlier, and where might we go and what our next steps might be, I do think that we are obligated as a group to capture these comments in the discussion today and provide it ultimately to the Corps and other stakeholders, right? So my intent would be to do that in a narrative, but again, we're constrained in how we can do it in the time frame that we have to operate on. We can certainly capture the discussion today in the form of minutes, and those minutes can be distributed in a way that each of the task force members can comment on as they relate to facts that were discussed or information that was discussed today, right? We can't add new information to that, but we can correct the information that's synthesized and summarized in minute forms, which ultimately would guide perhaps the information that's provided to the Corps. So I think that might be the best way to move forward to make sure that folks can have an opportunity to formulate what it is that we provide to the Corps before our next meeting. The Corps schedule of needing something by December 10th, I'm not quite sure that we can accommodate that, to be honest with you. And again, but the Corps has heard what was discussed today and can take that into consideration, and it should not preclude them from, again, moving forward in an appropriate manner, so they don't have to wait necessarily for the task force. But so I think if that's okay with the folks on the task force, we will make an effort to capture the discussion today, put it and formulate it in the form and minutes, right? And then we can distribute that and we can get individual comments back on that. But any final synthesis type of a document, whether it's a narrative letter or what, would need to be discussed as a group as a whole. So is there any, looking at folks on the task force now, if they have a preference to do it differently? Wendy?
Yeah, I think it needs to be really clear that these are minutes of a meeting. You got our best professional judgment, give documents we were provided and the presentation we are provided. We don't have enough information based on this one meeting and these minutes to either come to consensus or make a recommendation. It needs to be really clear what this is.
Yeah, to that point, what I would try to do is capture the discussion, right, and all of the comments that were made. And this is information from a body that is going to, can be considered by the Corps as they move forward. Again, we're not dictating ultimately to the Corps what they do or they do not do, right? So, yeah, I agree. I'm looking around. Evelyn, you're nodding in agreement, okay? Jim looks like he's nodding in agreement as well. I can't see Mike anymore. He's off my screen.
I agree.
Okay, and Val? Okay, so we will do our best to capture the information and distribute that information as minutes as a guide ultimately to preparing perhaps a narrative letter moving forward. And we will also work with our group, with the task force, to schedule another meeting and probably as early as possible, but it would be a brief meeting essentially to make sure that we're going to agree on whatever document that we might provide to the Corps. Again, I anticipate that document's not quite like a consensus document that we prepared last year, but more of a narrative of what was discussed today. Okay. All right. So I don't think I'm going to make sure I'm going back to folks. I'm not seeing any other hands coming up. And I know that part of the thing we wanted to do is to keep this meeting just to around noon, and we're a little bit over. So I appreciate those that had an appointment right after noon for hanging in there with us. And we will certainly be in touch and look forward to the next time we meet. And again, I think everybody from the public who participated and shared their opinion, it's certainly meaningful, not only to the task force, but in this case, the Corps. So I guess I don't have anything else to say. So with that said, I'll chat with you guys another day. Thank you for participating.
Thank you very much.
All right, see you guys.